The young men of Thebes threw off the Spartan yoke, but much of Greece was still under their hegemony, in part thanks to Persia, and despite it being broken, the king's peace still mattered. With Athens on the rise again and Sparta still powerful despite this setback and a few others, there was now a three-way race for supremacy as Thebes capitalized on their momentum. But to the north, new kingdoms were forming and looking beyond their own borders to the Greek mainland with hungry eyes and deeply held ambition. These are states that used to be very tribal that were starting to come together and become dangerous to more than just their neighbors. Some of these kingdoms will become allies of the three city-states. Some will become enemies. Some will be both at different times in some form or fashion as the ever-shifting nature of these exciting times continues. Leaders of war, politics, art, and other forms of culture abound as well. Some are involved in all four of those, or just one or two, or what have you. Some are names we know well even today, and some claim descent from others we know well. For example, today we've got a dynasty that claims descent from Achilles. And some have stories even more interesting than the most famous. They just aren't as well known, which is part of the value of talking about this stuff. We have further doings and adventures of Agesilaus, Artaxerxes, Epaminondas, Pelopidas, Parysatis, that's our Circe, Cabrius, our Jaime Lannister, Tiribazus, and more players will enter the picture, of course. That's how history works, right? There's always people coming and going. The Greek world is growing too, though. In this period, it was, well, besides it being the most important, perhaps, and in my opinion, the most interesting period of ancient Greece, it's certainly growing and gaining wealth and power and influence, which makes it more of a player outside of its region. That's part of why Persia got invested in the first place in conquering them. And that means more ambition. There's more to take, more power to hold. The more powerful a country is, the more incentive ambitious people have to seize that. So there's more intrigue. That follows more at stake, more impact on us today, and more great comparisons to A Song of Ice and Fire as our journey through one of my favorite periods in history continues. All that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome back, everybody. It's part 3 of our delving into, I say ancient Greece. Technically, it's classical Greece. Ancient Greece is like Trojan War era. This is, 800 years after that. It's all a blur, right? Ancient Greece sounds cooler than classical Greece, so, But, I want to get the terminology right, just so you know that I do know the right terminology. And so you know, too. We're here almost every Saturday, or Sunday, that is, almost every Sunday for live streams on YouTube. And during the TV season, those will be Monday at 6. That is our standard, and that will continue into 2026. If you prefer to catch us on podcast-only platforms, you can catch us on any of them. All podcast platforms have History of Westeros. And if you listen on Patreon as a member, it's ad-free. This is actually Topics Moot episode number 16 from last year, but, it's part 3 of a topic that, it was a lot bigger than I originally intended, but that's fun, we're going bigger than with it, and that's a good thing, I get to go delve deeper. Deeper dives are fun. Certainly, we'd love to hear your feedback on this one. It's not something I know as well as A Song of Ice and Fire, and with that in mind, the parallels to A Song of Ice and Fire, as I said last time, I believe, here in 2025, still catching new parallels in A Song of Ice and Fire, let alone here in classical/ancient Greece. So I've probably missed some parallels. Every once in a while, I'm writing here and I'm like, oh, a new one strikes me. Like, we got hundreds of A Song of Ice and Fire characters and even more real world people here. So there's so many connections that could be made, and, well, I can't have made them all by now. So if you catch any, or something occurs to you like that, absolutely let us know, and I'll throw out those mentions. And speaking of that, I'll mention some episodes that relate to this one at the end. Here's our trivia question for the day, which will also have the answer revealed at the end. It is, who is said to be responsible for creating the Sacred Band of Thebes? Sacred Band of Thebes. We talked about them a lot last time at the end of the episode, and they're certainly going to feature for quite a while. They're historically important from this era for several decades. Poll question. Shay is putting that up here on YouTube. You'll be able to catch it on the podcast platform if you listen on Spotify, I believe. And the questions are you familiar with this era of Greek history? The possible answers are yes, very, or somewhat, or no, it's all Greek to me. So let me know, let us know. I'm curious how much of this is new to you. Though this episode absolutely functions as a standalone, that's the thing about history. No matter what years you're looking at, there's always something interesting that came before. Even if you go back all the way to when there is no written history, yeah, it keeps going back. There's archaeology and related fields give us the stories there when there's nothing written. So, and that's a factor that I think is underrated here, is that people that lived in the 4th century BC, whether in Greece or elsewhere, they're more connected to our prehistoric ancestors than we are, because, well, 2,500 years earlier, they lived closer to those times. Their level of technology, level of understanding of the world, level of what we would call superstition, what they would call beliefs, right? Those were closer to the beliefs of people far more ancient. They had a closer connection to all that, right? And their concept of where they came from, Greek mythology, right? Well, it's a collection of some of the most influential stories in the Western world, right? To them, though, it's not story, it's history. There are people who genuinely believed in Zeus and Hera and Athena and Ares and Aphrodite, and these are beings who resemble the great figures of the age of heroes in Westeros, right? Like the Grey King and Garth Greenhand. These are very similar type figures to the deities of Greek myth. Interestingly, too, they believed in things like guest right and kinslaying. Kinslaying caused religious pollution, right? That's the idea. In fact, murder can cause religious pollution. Sparta had that pit they threw people into. Athens had one too. It's just pits executions were the thing in this era. In fact, the Athenian pit was called the Barathron, so it's only one letter different than Baratheon. And they believed in part because killing somebody with a blade or anything like that would cause religious pollution. But if you throw them in a pit, well, it's the ground that killed them, not you. So that was their way around that problem. Anyway, it's very fascinating, these beliefs that they had and how some of them are... George uses them and doesn't necessarily always understand himself where that original real world influence came from. Usually he does, I'm sure. We're going to continue this story for another 40 more years, roughly, in terms of what we're setting out to do with this series now that I've gotten a better handle on it. We're aiming to get to the 330s. This is the 370s we're in right now, and it won't take quite as long as that sounds like. Some of the years... I mean, we only covered about 3 years last episode, and this episode will probably cover about the same. But in future episodes, we're going to cover 10 or 15 years because some of the years, there's just not much happens. These years, quite a bit's happening. So that's our plan. We're going to keep doing this about once every 4 to 6 weeks until it's done. And then sometime in 2026, we're going to pick it back up again as the time period shifts into another very interesting phase that I also want to cover, and it's featuring a lot of the same characters. So we'll do that in 2026. Anyway, that era is really interesting because it's a bigger version of the Game of Thrones. Much larger armies, much more powerful leaders. The scale is much, much bigger than what we're dealing with now, and it's fascinating to see the process transition from one to the other. When these things happen, culture and trade and humanity in general prospers more. These high lords are playing their Game of Thrones an awful lot in this era. The people deserve a break, right? So when they stop, that's when new versions of culture and trade and humanity, that's when that stuff starts to bubble to the surface, when it's not distracted or pushed back by war. They lived in very interesting times, these folks. They don't know that they lived in such interesting times, but what I mean by that, I gave a prior example of this when we were talking about all the different people that Plutarch featured in his parallel lives of Greeks and Romans. Now, we're not talking about the Romans, but the Greeks, something like half of the Greeks that are the 25 that he chose from all of Greek history, more than half of them fall into the 75 to 100 year period that we're looking at here. So that's just goes to show. 100 years prior to this era, very interesting, less spoken of, and just a lot less influential. 100 years after the time we're talking about, similar. It's just not as interesting. It's interesting. There's pretty much always something of interest in history, at least to me. But yeah, it's amazing how more interesting the 3rd and 4th centuries are than the 2nd and 1st, which are just like, yeah, these are okay, but not worth getting into really that much, mostly for academic purposes. These are the times that stick with us. These are the people that lived that we still talk about 2,500 years later. The names are still big. So that is really cool to me. I think that if you can, if you want to make your mark on history and you're still being spoken of 2,500 years later in a small country, that's well done. You accomplished your goal there by getting into history. Here are our section headers for today. The Owl Awakens. That's the year 378. Then Athens joins Thebes. The Boeotian War, the year 377. The year 376. The Power of the North. We'll get a little more deep into who the players are in the North and how that's playing out, like what's going on there. And then we'll work our way through the year 375, which I believe we will finish this episode with. We're going to start with a quote from Plutarch to get us started. I just think this guy is just such a great writer. Not only is he valuable because of his historical insight and the fact that he's a source that there aren't many sources of for this time period, just actually a great writer. Fear is the bloodiest passion in princes. Confidence, on the other hand, being merciful, gentle, and unsuspicious. So we see among wild beasts the intractable and least tameable are the most timorous and most easily startled. The nobler creatures, whose courage makes them trustful, are ready to respond to the advances of men. Now, this was said in relation to Artaxerxes, who was a fearful ruler. He would just have nobles and people killed sometimes because he was mad or paranoid. That's why he says fear is the worst thing for a leader to have, because they exercise their power with fear, and that just is bad for everybody, including them. So you need confidence in leadership, something that the ancient Greeks were very aware of, that maybe a lot of leaders of today fake confidence because they know how important it seems, or they express confidence when they don't really feel it. These are the things that ancient Greeks really discussed a lot of, like the nature of leadership, the nature of humanity, like where it all comes from. And like I said, the comparisons to nature, because they lived closer to nature back then. If they're going to look at the behavior of animals and recognize that they, as humans, are not that different, they all, they're different, certainly, but there are things that we have in common with the animal kingdom. That's why the philosophers of this time were so important, because these are the questions they tackled. And some of their answers are still valid. They haven't been expanded on all that much. Some of them have been expanded on a lot. Some of it's complete bunk. But the fact that any of it is still relevant 2,500 years later? Wow. The Owl Awakens. Even when fighting is minimal to nil, there's always intrigue, right? The plotting never ends, even when we're not aware of it. There's always somebody plotting somewhere. There's always power to be had. The world doesn't rest. There's just too many people. There's always somebody aiming for something and trying to gather other people together to do that. So in the year 378, the year after Thebes got their city back, Agesilaus had men in Athens. He had, his spies, his informers, what happened. Some of them are diplomats. Some of them are just there as ambassadors. It's their job, right? And they were very concerned with keeping Athens from joining with Thebes, right? It's a three-way power struggle. The last any of them wants is 2 against 1, to be the one in a 2-on-1 situation. They either want to keep all 3 independent, or they want to be the 2 versus 1. So Agesilaus, remember the younger king at this time with Sparta's 2 kings, was Cleombrotus. But Agesilaus and Cleombrotus were not working together. They did not have the same goals here. Now, Agesilaus is obviously more powerful, but Cleombrotus was there. He was on the scene. His army was the one on the march. He was actually out in the field, where Agesilaus was maneuvering and intriguing from Sparta. Agesilaus, his goal wasn't that just to keep Athens from joining Thebes. That was Cleombrotus' goal. It makes sense. He's like, well, let's keep these 2 from being allies. Agesilaus, remember, he hates Thebes so much. He wanted Athens not just to not be Thebes' friend. He wanted them to be hostile to Thebes. He's like, you can't be neutral. You have to be their enemy. So he's like, us 2 should be their enemy. And Athens is like, but why? We don't hate them like you do. We don't have a personal issue with them. In fact, they've done some good things for us, and we were kind of helping them in return for the good service they did us when our city was conquered by tyrants. They helped us then, so we were just returning the favor. But Agesilaus, very stubborn, very proud, and very powerful. So he had 3 men there in particular, these diplomats. One was named Timocles. He was of the Gerousia, which, if you recall, those are the 28 elders that are one step below the 5 elders who are the Iphors, who are a step below the 2 kings. Now, it's almost like a proto-parliamentary system where, yes, they have 2 kings. Part of the reason they have 2 kings is so that one king doesn't have too much power. But that's also why they have 5 Iphors and 27 or 28 Gerousia, is to also balance out the power of the monarch. So it's a very interesting system. Now, Themistocles was a friend of Agesilaus, something we can't forget. This is a very small, tight-knit state, even though it's a city-state that has reach all throughout the Aegean, all throughout Greece. It's still just kind of a handful of people are making the calls here, and these people are friends with each other. So it's like an old boys network of power and connections there. So they're all, so of course the opposite happened for a very unexpected reason, right? What Agesilaus wanted to happen, Athens being aggressive towards Thebes, he got the opposite. Athens decided to become hostile to Sparta, but for, yes, like I said, unexpected reasons, but understandable. Let's get to it. At this point, the city of Thespiae was pro-Spartan and only 36 miles from Thebes. So Thebes isn't cool with that. Like, you got these Spartan friends really close by. That's a problem. They had a garrison. A military governor was ruling it. A Spartan military governor. Thespiae normally is not ruled from outside. They're ruled from, like any Greek city-state. They have their own leaders. But in this case, Sparta's got them. They have a guy named Sphodrios. He's the Harmos, the military governor. So he's in charge of Thespiae. And he was one of Cleombrotus's inner circle. So he's really close to the younger king, the one who's actually out in the field at this point. Sphodrios, for some reason, he decided to do a similar thing as the Cadmea to Athens. He's like, well, what if we make a little sneaky attack when they're not ready for it? And we seize, in this case, he wanted to seize the Piraeus, which is their port. Hugely important, right? Because Athens is a maritime city. Their naval power is their power. I mean, sure, they have an army, but it's their naval power that really sets them apart from everybody else. So taking their port would be huge. So this is very similar to what Phoibedas did, and just to Thebes. And we also know, as we discussed at the time, that Phoibedas was probably working with Agesilaus. That's who probably gave him the go-ahead, gave him the order. In this case, it probably wasn't. Because remember what we just said. Agesilaus wants Athens to be hostile to Thebes. So the worst thing you could do is attack Athens. That's not going to make them hostile to Thebes. That's going to make them hostile to you, right? That's blatantly obvious. So why would Sphodrios do this? Why would he launch an attack in March with his garrison attacking the Piraeus? Ill-conceived plot, by the way. The one with Leontiades and Phoibedas, that was well made. They pulled that off, and it was perfect. Not a single person was even killed. They conquered the city without a single death. That was amazing. Not good, but well done. In this case, Sphodrios and his men were marching towards the Piraeus, and morning came. It wasn't even like they didn't get there in time, because it was poorly planned. They weren't going to they should have known that they weren't going to be able to make that in time before the dawn came. So when the time morning comes, they're just standing there in the open plains, and people are like, there's like a Spartan army right there. What are they doing? There wasn't anything they could accomplish. So they're just like, okay, we better turn around and go home. The gig is up, the jig is up, the gig and the jig. They're both up. They didn't want to go home empty-handed, though, so they just started burning some farms, destroyed a few estates, what have you. They got some spoils, a little bit of loot. Certainly not enough to break the king's peace, though. It was not worth it to re-break this arrangement. Now, who did this, though? Since it probably wasn't Agesilaus, because, well, he had his 3 diplomat friends in Athens. They were in big danger. All of a sudden, everybody in Athens is mad at Sparta, and these 3 diplomats are like, uh-oh, everybody's mad at us. So their argument was, hey, if we had known about this, why would we still be here? Why wouldn't we leave? Like, you guys are mad at us, and that's obvious, right? We knew you'd be mad. We would have known you'd be mad at us for this, so why would we stay? We would have fled the city if we knew this was going to happen. And they're like, okay. That's actually a good point. You would have fled. Okay. All right. We buy that. And also, guys, this guy Sphodrios who did that, he's clearly breaking the... We're going to have him executed. Don't you worry about that. We're going to have him executed. For sure. For sure. So Athens is like, all right, these diplomats can go. We'll let them off. That's fine. One theory that happened here is that Pelopidas and Melone sent some guys, some talkers to Sphodrius and primed his ego, talked him into thinking that this was a good idea. The idea being that these were men who dressed as Spartan allies or pretended to be Spartan allies, but they were actually agents of the Thebans. Now, this is just a theory. We don't actually know. Now, but because Sphodrius was in Cleombrotus' inner circle, that could be it, right? It could be Cleombrotus' plan. It could be like Cleombrotus was trying to be like Agesilaus, making these moves, but he's just not as good at it. So we just don't know. And if, it's a pitiful sneak attack, it just, something is weird about the whole situation. So Athens is like, all right, fine. You give justice to Sphodrius. You guys can go home. So Sphodrius was recalled to Sparta to face trial by the Gerousia, right? He feared that he would be executed. Reasonable, right? That's what they said they'd do. So he fled. He didn't go back to Sparta. He ran off. This created, for the first and only time ever in Greek or Roman history, a person tried in absentia was acquitted. Yeah, Sphodrius was acquitted. Just like Phoibidas, they said, oh yeah, we're going to punish this guy, and then they didn't. But it's really messy. It isn't just Spartan authoritativeness or just their hypocrisy. It's a little bit different than that. Sphodrius' son, Cleonymus, apparently a very, very handsome young man. And he was the lover of Agesilaus' son, Archidamus. So you've got a royal tryst going on here that's interfering with justice being done. So that's very likely why there's something happened here, or at least behind the scenes, the wrangling, the difficulty here, that's dirty, isn't it? You got people, just young men affairs, and that's why this justice was subverted, probably. Now, Agesilaus' excuse was Sphodrius is a full Spartan. He's a good soldier. We shouldn't be punishing Spartans who try to do things that are for the good of our country. Again, he's just using this very hypocritical argument. Yeah, but you all agreed to the king's peace. You can't just make this argument after you said, yeah, no wars between any of us. So he's using weasel words, doing what he often does. He's being a hypocrite. That's Agesilaus. But he may have done it for Cleombrotus. He may have done it to get a favor out of Cleombrotus. Look, I'm standing up for you. You did this. I'm going to take some of the heat for it, even though I had nothing to do with it. Even though you actually hurt my plans. You almost got some of my friends killed. I'm going to take this hit for you. I'm going to put myself in the way of this, and you're going to owe me a favor. That is very believable. Now, Thespiae was without their military governor because Sphodrius was recalled. So who did they send to replace him? Phoibidas! The guy that took the Cadmea, reassigned to be the garrison commander 36 miles from Thebes. You can't tell me that was not an intentional insult probably by Agesilaus, but maybe by the Sparta in general. They were like, this'll really stick it up their craw. This is going to insult the hell out of them. That's what they did. They sent one of the most hated men in Thebes, in Thebes, they sent to be a military governor less than 40 miles away. Yep. So yeah, Athens had enough of all this. They were like, you again didn't punish the guy that broke the king's peace? This is twice now. Even he thought he was going to be executed. He fled and you acquitted him in absentia? This is unheard of. It literally was unheard of. So they're like, all right, that's enough. You gosh darn hypocrites. They declared war on Sparta. They elect Timotheus as one of the strategos. Remember, that's general. He was the son of that man, Conon, that was a big part of the earlier phase of the war. Chabrias was also sent out in charge of 5,000 mercenary troops. And Iphicrates was not around, though, because he had been sent to Egypt to help Persia reconquer them. Pharnabazus, the paymaster, had overall command, and Iphicrates and him were going to work together. However, this is going to take so long to get going, we're not going to even talk about it today, even though you would think that a few years would be enough to launch an expedition against Egypt. It was going to take them like 5 years to get started, so that's not going to be a part of this episode. This whole time, they're just getting that ready. Now, Athens is also reforming their league. The Athenian League was basically an empire. It was like, hey, you join us, but then they just tell you what to do and make you give up money and soldiers. This time, they're like, hey, guys, it's not like that this time. Last time, it was subjugation. This time, it's an alliance. We're just going to be friends. I promise. They promised. Yeah, we'll see about that, won't we? What do you... how many of you actually out there think they're going to keep that promise? Well, we'll see. Many took the chance anyway because, well, even if Athens is lying, Sparta's still worse in their eyes. So yeah, damned if you do, damned if you don't. So to commemorate, they made a large stela, like, a large stone carving thing, affirming their alliance with Persia and their enmity with Sparta. So this made it part propaganda in a sense, like, yes, we're alliance with Persia. I mean, that's not something they want to really flaunt, right? I mean, Persia's not popular. Medism, right? That's a cultural no-no. So Sparta's like, all right, we're going to war. Fine. We'll fight you, Athens. We don't back down. That's their attitude. They never back down. They called their allies, which were lots of them. Agesilaus went back into the field. He's an old man, but he's still marching around. He's still leading troops. 18,000 men. Now, Chabrias was sent out with those men, those mercenaries, and a few citizen soldiers to block the mountain passes into Attica. So that way, they knew the Spartans would be on the march, but if they could defend the mountain passes, then Sparta wouldn't be able to do anything to them. And so Agesilaus was like, yep, I see you guys guarding the passes, but I don't care. That's not where we're going. We're going to Thebes. So they marched past Chabrias, marched past Athens towards Thebes. That's who he wanted, his enemies, the one, his hated. Remember all the things they've done to him, at least from his perspective. They ruined his expedition to Persia. They ruined his sacrifice to be like Agamemnon. All these things. That's not even nearly a full list, but he hates them. The Boeotian War. So this is basically the phase of the 370s that's considered the war between Sparta and Thebes at this time. It's kind of a funky way to think about it because they're kind of almost always at war. And even when they're not at war, they're kind of still at war. Anyway, Plutarch, again, we're going to quote him, points out something about Greek warfare in this era that is the reverse of Westeros. Quote,
Homer always brings his boldest and most valiant heroes into battle well-armed and equipped, and the Greek lawgivers punish him who casts away his shield, not him who throws down his sword or spear, thus teaching that his own defense from harm, rather than the infliction of harm upon the enemy, should be every man's first care, and particularly if he governs a city or commands an army.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer that. Like, this is basically saying that, yeah, you're a soldier, you're in the military, but your life is the most important thing here, right? It's the value of a military that values the weapon versus that values the defense, right? The thing that keeps you alive. So that's why the shield was esteemed over the spear or the sword, because the shield represents defense, it represents the life of the citizen, which is important. Later, militaries don't care as much about their soldiers, their citizens, and a lot of militaries don't even use citizens as soldiers, and they care about it even less. So that's an interesting cultural value here, that they believe that, yeah, if you throw your shield and if you show your sword and spear down, like that's the problem in Westeros. They don't care if you throw your shield down. Like, if you're throwing your weapon down, you've already thrown your shield down. That's kind of how they see it. But here, it's the opposite. It's like, no, if you throw your spear down or you throw your sword down, we don't really care. It's your shield. That's the one that matters. Your life as a citizen of our city-state is important. And that's partly because there's fewer of them. These cities aren't huge, not by modern standards. Anyway, Athens maybe kind of was. But the individual soldier has more importance to the city when there's just a much smaller population. The ratios are different. By the way, isn't this the coolest mug? This is my friend Jessica gave me this. It's a climber's mug, so you can only hold it by pinching the side here. So, the year 378. Oh, actually, backing up a little bit, one last comment about this. What is one of the most noble ways to die in Westeros? In service of your lord, dying in service of your lord, fighting for what you believe in. The sentiment's different. Yeah, they want you to fight for your city. They want you to stand up and be brave and not back down and not let people walk over you. But you still have to protect They don't want people who are just like out there like berserker mode. No, we want to careful and thoughtful soldier, fight, but don't throw your life away. Interesting bit of the view of humanity on the ancient world that maybe isn't always what we expect, given how prominent slavery and murder and other things were. A rare moment of human decency there amidst war, right? So in 378, Agesilaus, his invasion proceeds. Like I said, he took his army past Athens, headed straight for Thebes, Boeotia. The command of Thebes was held by Gorgodas, the guy who founded the Sacred Band, or perhaps refounded it. There may have been a different name 300 group before them that they were sort of reforming. It's not clear. Anyway, he ordered large defensive fortifications built. Not around the city, because they've already got their walls. I mean around the countryside. They built huge trenches and palisades stretching from Thespiae to Tegyra. So maybe 24 or more miles of trenches and palisades. That's a huge amount of fortifications, right? So that must have taken quite a lot of work. So in the spring of 378, Agesilaus gets there, and he's like, oh, all right, I see. You guys are prepared. So he started looking for weaknesses. He sent men, maybe kind of like Tywin Lannister at the Red Fork when Edmure was defending. And he's like, all right, I'm going to see if I can find any spots where this isn't well defended. And then if we can find a pressure point like that, we'll hit it really hard. He couldn't find one. It was pretty evenly distributed and well made. But he did find a different mistake. It wasn't the fortifications themselves that were flawed. It was the patrols. He realized, Agesilaus did, that the Thebans were not mixing up the time of their patrols. Their patrols would pass at the same time each day. So he was able to, kind of use a rhythm to say, okay, this patrol just passed. There won't be another one for an hour and a half. Attack. So they basically got over the border without having to fight anybody. They just, waited for the guards to be gone and then moved up quickly, filled the barrier, crossed it, and moved on. They got to about 3.5 kilometers from Thebes, where the Athenian and Theban army was waiting. Chabrias, after seeing the Spartan army pass by, took a different mountain pass to get to Thebes, so he was still there. He was combining with Thebes, so there's the Theban Athenian army now is combined. So he's like, all right, we're Sparta, we're not afraid. This is, again, the first action by the Sacred Band. Gorgodas had them spread throughout, so it would kind of like stiffen the ranks all around. Now, he marched forward, Agesilaus did, while some of Gorgodas and Chabrias' men threw javelins and slings at them. And as Agesilaus advanced, those men ran back up the hill to take cover, and Agesilaus positioned his men at the bottom of the hill. Okay, so even if you don't know much about military stuff, it's pretty intuitive that marching up a hill to attack people who are at the top of a hill is dangerous. The people at the top of the hill have the advantage on the people coming up at them, right? That seems pretty straightforward. So marching up the hill would put his phalanx at a disadvantage, but this is the guy that took Thebes head on when he didn't have to, just to get some extra casualties. And he also has a very strong belief in the supremacy of his army. So what does he do? He'd shown a willingness to take casualties. This is his most hated foe. So there was the military equivalent of an awkward pause where they just kind of sit there and stare at each other for a minute. And then Agesilaus does it. He orders his men forward up the hill. The Spartans themselves might have been a little surprised at the command, and I wonder what went through their minds. Like, really? But they're obeying. They're not hesitating. These are Spartans. They are very, very inured and used to following commands. It's drilled into them from a young age. So they did it. No hesitation. They may have had some second thoughts, but their feet didn't. They marched. So many of the allies as well, who are Spartan allies, are like, oh, well, that's interesting. Agesilaus is taking us up this hill. Well, he knows what he's doing. Now, on the other side, the Thebans and the Athenians are like, oh, fear, excitement. Like, I don't want to fight Sparta. They're unbeatable. No one has beaten a Spartan army on land in hundreds of years, literally. Right? It was pretty much unheard of. So that's like, that's in the back of their heads. Like, even though but on the other hand, they're like, wait, we have a high ground. Maybe we can actually win. Maybe this is the edge we need to overcome their advantage. But let's not forget who was in charge here. Yes, Gorgidas and Cabrius. And what have we said about Cabrius? What has been his modus operandi that we've seen? This is why I named him like a Jaime Lannister, because he's extremely confident, maybe to the point of cockiness. We could even call him Cabrius the Confident. And this is a young man too, so he has that little bit of that youthful cockiness. And Agesilaus is not young. He's in his 60s at this point, if I remember correctly. So when he sees the Spartan army coming at them, rather than getting excited or scared or some combination of the two, he knows exactly what's going on. He thinks it's a bluff. He's like, nah, he's just trying to intimidate it. He's trying to put the fear of his men into ours. He's going to not march up the hill. He just wants our men to feel scared for a second and then to have them remember that. Be like, see, you guys are afraid of us. He wanted to put that in them and hurt their morale for later. But Cabrius had the exact answer to counter this move. He gave the equivalent order that in modern times would be called at ease. So get this straight. Agesilaus orders his men to start marching up the hill to attack. And Cabrius' response is, at ease, men. Take a breather. The most dangerous, unbeatable army for centuries is coming right at you. And he's like, chill, guys. No problem. And Gorgidas, the Theban leader, is like, oh, all right. That's what we're doing? All right. At ease. Maybe he understood in that moment what Cabrius was doing. It was a gesture of contempt. It was like, yeah, you guys aren't doing this. I see through your plan. You're not doing this. It also demonstrated their discipline. One single command, everyone goes at ease. Just one. That shows discipline. Like, that shows how well organized they are, which Sparta usually believes they have the advantage on discipline and organization like that. So seeing that, actually these guys have it together. So he sent a message. So Agesilaus was just trying to scare them, to remind them that they dare not it's a bully move. He was trying to make you flinch. Like, made you flinch, like holding his fist out like that. See, you're scared. It gives morale to his men to show how afraid the enemy are and puts fear into the eyes of, or in the minds of his enemy. Clever move. But Cabrius saw right through it and turned it around on him. So he didn't get the message across after all. Cabrius flipped it. Instead of the men being scared, they became incredibly confident. They're like, boom, our leader just way outplayed that Spartan, and that guy is 3 times older and one of the most feared. Agesilaus is probably considered the most powerful man in Greece at this point, and Cabrius just owned him. It's a great move. So Sparta, he could perceive that this was using fear as a weapon, not actually trying to start a battle. So word spread about this tactic. It became a big deal. He would have had huge internet fame if there had been an internet. There would have been memes about him, right? They put a statue up of him, and he asked for that rest pose to be the statue, like them resting their shields on their knees and just like taking a knee, like you see that in like football, or to take a knee, everybody, and listen, is very much like that. And I bring up football intentionally because from then on, athletes at the Olympics would adopt that pose. They'd be like, I'm the winner. They're like, this is just to show their confidence, to show how in control they are. They adopt Cabrius' move there. It's just like I said, it became a cultural meme. People just did it to remember that and to honor it. And yeah, public speakers would do it sometimes too. They would it'd be to show that they were done. It'd be like, hey, pause for applause. You take the knee, and they'd be like, oh yeah. It brings them on. It's just a great way to fire up the crowd. So Agesilaus really backfired for him. But on the other hand, he's like, yeah, okay, you had your moment, but you didn't win anything. You didn't beat anything. You got some confidence, but I still have an army in your territory. I'm marching around doing stuff. This isn't going to really matter in the long run. So that was his attitude. Meanwhile, while Agesilaus is ravaging farms, destroying estates, while that army sits on the hill behind him, his men are regaining their confidence. Like, that guy, he had a good move against us, but we're still in charge. They're still afraid to fight us, right? Like, that's plain. They're still on their hill, and we're just marching around destroying their territory, and they're not doing anything about it. So meanwhile, Phoibidas, he's like, all right, well, my king is in the region, so I'm going to start launching some attacks from Thespiae. We're so close by, we've got a great base of operations to strike at Thebes from less than 40 miles away. So he starts raiding, like Ironborn-style raiding, but without the ships. The allies split their forces, right? So Chabrias neither of them take on Agesilaus. Gorgidas heads to go deal with Phoibidas, while Chabrias takes his army to attack Spartan allies. And eventually he takes ship and starts attacking some islands. So he does a lot of work, but neither of them actually stop Agesilaus. So he continues destroying farms and just does a lot of damage to Thebes. His goal is to try to maybe cause long-term harm by destroying enough farms to cause a food shortage. Because he doesn't have the ability to take the city. Taking Thebes isn't possible even with the size of the army he has. It's just too big. It's like, imagine like a lot of times you have an army that just isn't, like Stannis' army isn't big enough to take Winterfell, that kind of thing, like he's going to have to do something sneaky to make that work. So eventually he just marched home. Agesilaus did. He's just like, all right, well, campaign season's over. We destroyed a lot of farms and estates. That's all we could accomplish. Let's go home. The Spartan allies and Sparta itself, not impressed by Agesilaus' campaign. They're like, yeah, that's a little weak, actually. Yeah, you dominated them on the ground. They didn't fight you. That's nice, but you didn't, all you destroyed was some food. That's going to grow back. So Gorgidas is heading towards Phoibidas. Nice similar names here to get into a war here, or a battle. And on his way with his squad, including the Sacred Band and other Thebans, they encounter a squad of 200 enemies and kill them all. And then they start raiding Thespian territory. So it's like counter-raiding. They're raiding Thespiae while Thespiae is raiding them. It accomplished little. Gorgidas is just like Agesilaus, just destroying some farms and stuff like that. It's not going to get you very far. It's something, but yeah. And Phoibidas is still raiding Theban territory, and he's accomplishing more. So Phoibidas is partly because Thebes is much bigger. They have a larger population. Destroying food has a bigger effect. But Gorgidas says, okay, well, we're going to have to have it out here. Let's go fight. Let's go see if we can get him into a pitched battle. So Gorgidas takes his men towards where he believes Phoibidas is. And they wanted some payback, for sure, right? They know who this is. They know Phoibidas is the guy that seized the Cadmea. They definitely want him, right? He didn't get justice from Sparta. They'd let him go. Well, this is their time to give him justice, if they can. So at one point, Gorgidas orders an advance against the two armies are arrayed facing each other, and Gorgidas says, okay, come at you. Phoibidas, his peltas, the javelins, slingers, and all of them, and a few archers, hit them pretty hard. So Gorgidas is pulls his men back. And then it becomes a retreat, and then it becomes a rout. They start running. Phoibidas is like, oh yeah, charge, get them, get as many as you can, stab them in the back, get them. Now, Phoibidas hadn't heard about what happened on the hill, apparently. He didn't realize these were very disciplined soldiers, as they demonstrated to Agesilaus. So yeah, it's a trap. It was a trap, yes. And ironically, this new discipline of Thebes, this attitude, this spine that they grew while living under Spartan hegemony for 3 years. Remember how Epaminondas would go around and tell the young Thebans, hey, challenge them to wrestling. And then after they would win these wrestling matches, say, hey, you can beat Sparta, yet we're still under their control. Isn't that embarrassing for us? So after years of that, and then seeing that they can win, this is a new generation of Thebans who they're not as inflicted over the spell of Spartan fear as their ancestors had been. They're braver about it. They're like, hey, times are changing. So this is those men. This is who's facing Phoibedas and his squad, a group of people that really want to prove themselves, really want to get back at this guy in particular, and really have a lot of ambitions for the future of their city. So the Theban cavalry is already superior. They just have better horses than Sparta. Sparta's cavalry is pretty pathetic, actually. In fact, that it's also, I think, it's kind of backwards from Westeros, backwards from most places, really, because horses are expensive. So by definition, cavalry tend to come from richer families. So it's the knights on horseback. Those are the main guys in Westeros, right? And the foot soldiers are the backups, the quantity rather than the quality. Here, it's kind of similar for most of the nations, but with Sparta, infantry is their thing. That's their dominant thing. That's the thing that they regard as important. That's manly. Riding horses is for weak people. Even though it's so militarily useful, they still look down on it. So their way of deciding who was the cavalry was just the losers, the weakest guys have to be the cavalry. So it's like they would just put that job on the weakest soldiers, which is the opposite of most other nations in Westeros or in real life. So this trap happens. This Theban cavalry turns around and strikes back at the charging Spartans and does an encircling maneuver. So they're not only are they surrounding them and can attack them from the sides, they're cutting off their retreat. And it was quite a victory. Phoibedas was killed. They got him. Must have been a big celebration. They're like, yeah, we got this guy, finally. All right, justice. And the Sacred Band had their first victory. And as is the norm in Greece, they erected a trophy to commemorate the battle. As a dedication to the gods. They would usually leave some shields and broken armor, whatever, just some captured armaments is usually how they do it. And a lot of times those trophies would stay there forever. Like, enemies don't take those trophies down. It was just a Greek cultural thing. Like, you win the battle, it's your right to be able to put that trophy up. And the losers have to come ask you for permission to get your dead. And now we've discussed how important burying the dead is. That's a thing that they would agree on almost always. Like 99.9% of the time, like, yes, you can come collect your dead bodies. Go ahead and do that. Peace. Truce while you collect your dead. Go give them their proper burial. They fought. They deserve a burial. It was a little bit of some aspects of war. They still had some unity about. So Sparta just said, all right, well, that didn't work. So they sent a new commander to Thebes and a new garrison. So they just rearmed Thebes. At the end of this year, 376, Rome builds its first city walls. The Servian Wall, very famous. That's the Servian Wall is why Hannibal, after defeating multiple Roman armies, could not take Rome because he didn't have a large enough army. Same deal with Agesilaus and Thebes. In fact, I'm pretty sure their armies were similar sizes, around 18,000 at the time. Also, Dionysius of Syracuse lost his third war to Carthage and had to pay 1,000 talents annually and basically cede all territory west of the Halsius River. You don't need to know what that is. It's basically on the western half of Sicily. 377. Thebes reestablishes the Boeotian League and Athens the Second Athenian League. Remember, the Second Athenian League was they're going around telling everybody, this time we're going to be allies, not dominators, right? Well, we promise. Meanwhile, Thebes' Boeotian League was an older thing, and it's reforming now that they have regained their power. Basically, it's all the region of Boeotia, with Thebes at the middle. Thebes is the powerful one. They all get to elect boetarchs. Everything is a something-atarch in Greece. If you're in charge of something, you're a something-atarch. They even have, like, the guy who cleans out all the drains, like a Tyrion. It's like a taxiarch or something like that. Anyway, they have it like a scholarch. Is like a school administrator, scholarly administrator, scholarch. Yeah, everything's an arc. So the boetarchs, there would be 7 boetarchs, 7 military leaders. It's the equivalent of the Athenian strategos. And basically the way they arranged it, 4 boetarchs would always be from Thebes, and the other 3 would be from the other Boeotian or other Boeotian city-states. Spring of 377, it's campaign season again. Agesilaus invades again. and again uses a ruse to get around the Theban wall. This guy's pretty clever, even though his last campaign didn't accomplish a whole lot. He still knows what he's doing in general. So this time he goes to the city of Plataea, which is another place that they had dominated at the time. Plataea is not very far from Thebes, so they have these multiple bases that they can kind of threaten Thebes by having an army close by. So what does he do? He goes to Plataea and orders them to set up an outdoor market for his troops, knowing that everybody would hear about this. So Thebes hears about it, as expected, and they go, ooh, let's attack that market. They're going to be vulnerable. It's a trap, but not the same kind of trap. They show up with their army ready to attack, and there's nobody there at all. It's just an outmaneuver. Agesilaus had already took his army in a different direction, knowing that they would fall for this bait. So this time, Agesilaus destroys the other farms, the farms he didn't destroy the previous year. So this starts to really add up. He destroyed a bunch of farms last year, then he destroys a bunch of farms this year. That's really taking its toll on Thebes' food supply. So it's a similar thing. And arguably, it doesn't seem like it's accomplishing unless Sparta wants more than just destroying food. Agesilaus knows what he's doing, but not everybody's on board with this long-term plan. They want quicker results. And Agesilaus gets sick. He's an older man, right? He gets sick and couldn't even walk. So they have to take him back home, and his campaign ends a little bit early. Cleombrotus, the other king, remember, he takes advantage of Agesilaus being a little bit out of it to push for a new strategy. He says, hey, yes, we're an infantry power, a land power, but we have had success at sea before. We've done it. Let's pivot. Instead of trying to beat Thebes on land, let's try to beat Athens at sea. Because look what trying to beat Thebes on land has gotten us. All we've done is burn a bunch of farms. It's not that helpful, right? But at sea, we can conquer islands. We can get more tribute that way. There's just more for us out there. And if we let Athens do it, well, then they're going to be a problem. So basically, he's arguing that Thebes is, they're taking away some of their vibe, some of what they're known for. But pragmatically speaking, wouldn't it be better to go after what Athens is doing? Won't that gain us more? To be clear on what happened with Agesilaus, he had a rupture in his foot, and his leg started to fill with blood. It was all swollen, and eventually they lanced it, and he passed out from blood loss, and then it's miraculously stopped. They thought he was going to die, but he was bedridden for a while. And at this point, Antalcidas was the Spartan who was an in-law of Agesilaus. He's the guy that arranged the king's peace. He's the guy that blockaded Athens so that they didn't have their grain supply, which brought them to the negotiating table, which enabled the king's peace to finally happen. Antalcidas went to Agesilaus and said, hey, isn't it amazing how good they've gotten after all the training we've given them? What he means by that, this is an insult. He's telling and an accusation at the same time, because what Agesilaus was doing somewhat violates the ancient law of Lycurgus, the semi-mythical Spartan lawgiver, the guy who wrote most of Sparta's laws for this era. Basically came up with their constitution, several centuries before. Lycurgus said, don't make war on the same people over and over too close together, because you're going to teach them how to fight. They're going to learn by necessity, and then they'll be more dangerous in the long term. You're giving them fighting lessons. That's what he said. You've given them training. You attacking them has taught them how to fight. And if you keep doing it over and over, they're going to get really good at fighting. You're making this happen. It's an interesting point, and one that you kind of have to, somewhat, you can see his point, kind of, right? Especially given how fired up these current generation of Thebans were to get back at Sparta after what they did. But Agesilaus can't do much about it right now. He's bedridden and possibly dying. Now, another little sidetrack here for the birth of a very important person in Athens, Demosthenes. He will become the most important orator of the ancient world, right up there with Cicero. Cicero is a little more famous. In fact, Plutarch's Parallel Lives, comparing Cicero to Demosthenes. There you go. There's an eerie number of coincidences between Cicero and Demosthenes, apart from their everlasting fame as speakers, including their deaths at the hands of very powerful and tyrannical people that they spoke out against. They orated against people that were dangerous. But after long careers, it's not like this was the first time they spoke out against someone dangerous. But at this point, Demosthenes is 7 years old. So he's not a big part of the story yet. But even as a child, he was fascinating because he was orphaned. His parents had some money. They had an estate of some kind, but his caretakers embezzled it all after the parents died, and they kind of ignored him. He was small. He was picked on by other kids. So he had no talent at speaking. He would slur his words. He would stutter, but he had overwhelming drive to improve. He practiced speaking with pebbles in his mouth, so that just to make him more clear, he would just form words while making it harder, which would make, it's like doing anything under those difficulties. When you take the difficulty away, it gets easier. So he would train himself to speak clearly by holding rocks in his mouth. And he would train himself to speak clearly after running, after sprinting. He would hike up a big mountain, run up the mountain and be like, and try to speak clearly after that. So all this effort into speaking well, into being an orator. And this is a trend. There weren't really orators the previous century. This is a new thing. People that have a lot of influence based on speeches that are delivered to the citizenry, a lot of which survive today. A lot of these are written down. Cicero's writings, Demosthenes' writings, you can find them now. They still influence modern writers. They're still analyzed quite a bit. So anyway, we don't have much to say about him right now. I just wanted to introduce him, a naturally uncharismatic person who became such through hard work. Kind of inspiring in that regard. Not militarily capable at all, but an amazing speaker and someone who's very self-made. So we'll catch up with him when he's a bit older, and just keep him back in your mind. Around this time as well, Mausolus is made satrap of Caria. Caria, remember, that's one of the regions of what's now Turkey. Now, Mausolus is pretty important. His wife, though, arguably more important, more interesting, Artemisia II, sister wife at that. So, yeah. Now, her story is amazing, but we're not to her time period yet. Now, they are part of the Hecatomnid dynasty. Remember, sister wives of both Artemisia and Mausolus are of the Hecatomnid dynasty from Hecatomnus. He was the first satrap of a Persian region who wasn't Persian, Hecatomnus. So he was an important guy. And Mausolus was his descendant. And Hecatomnus was made satrap after the death of Tissaphernes. Remember, Tissaphernes was the one that ratted out Cyrus's rebellion to Artaxerxes, and Tissaphernes was eventually assassinated on orders of Parysatis. So Mausolus, you might wonder, that name might sound a little familiar. Well, yeah, Mausolus is where we get the word mausoleum. Right, for real. And he is the man buried in the mausoleum of Mausolus. Artemisia built it for him as his tomb. That's his sister wife. So the mausoleum of Mausolus, in case you weren't aware, is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Let's take a quick moment to discuss those because, well, hey, we're in the ancient world, right? The Pyramid of Giza is the only one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world that is still standing. And it's also the oldest of those. So it's kind of funny that the oldest one is the only one that's still around. Now that one, it was roughly built around 2584 or so. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which may not have actually existed, would be the next oldest at 600 BC. Then the Temple of Artemis. Of course, Temple of Artemis, very relevant here. That was built in 550. Then it was destroyed and rebuilt in about 356. And that's at Ephesus, the city of Ephesus. There's the statue of Zeus at Olympia, which was built in 435. And then the mausoleum isn't built yet. It will be built after Mausolus dies. The Colossus of Rhodes is another one that hasn't been built yet, but will be built in the second half of our story in later 2026. And the Pharos Lighthouse at Alexandria, built by Alexander the Great, who also doesn't exist yet, but will also be part of our story later. The walls of Babylon at the time were considered a wonder of the ancient world in that period. They aren't now, but the walls of Babylon were built something like 1800 BC, if not earlier, and they were 86 kilometers long and 24 meters thick, 97 meters high. They were huge, especially for the ancient world. Those are probably some of the biggest walls by far for 1,000 years or so. They were built out of brick and bitumen. Another ancient world wonder was the Palace of Cyrus. Cyrus was not to be confused with Cyrus the Younger, the failed rebel against Artaxerxes, but the founder of the Persian dynasty was Cyrus the Great. And his palace is still remembered. Also, there's the Pergamon altar. I don't know much about that, but that's another one that was built around 180 that was considered a wonder of the ancient world that isn't considered one now. So let's go to Persia while we're there. Let's stick with them for a minute. Catch up on that. I'm gonna give you the tale of Aspasia, aka Milto. Now, this is a interesting nickname. She was considered the most beautiful woman in the world at the time. She was from Phocaea, which is Western Turkey. So she was Greek, but, Ionian Greek, so very much often under the yoke of Persia. When she was young, she was carried off to be in the harem of Cyrus the Younger because so beautiful. And she was brought into his presence, and all the other women were like flirting and trying to make friends with the prince, trying to catch his attention. And Cyrus is like, "Hey, what about that one? Send her over here." She was kind of being sullen and not being all flirty like the rest of them. And she says, she's like, "No." And so his chamberlains are like going to go grab her and force her to go towards him. And she just speaks up, says, "Anyone who lays a hand on me will rue it." She's like basically a slave, and she says this. So it's very brave. And Cyrus basically says, "She's the only real one here. This is the only real woman you brought me." Because this is how extremely powerful men would react to strong-willed women. They would look at it like a curiosity. They still wouldn't be impressed. It's like they look at it like the way Drogo treated Daenerys. It was like he's treating her like a horse. She thinks she's being, he's this man of valor and trying to treat her well, but really he's treating her how he would treat a horse. This is the same kind of thing. Like he's impressed by her, but he's still looking down on her while he's like, "Oh, a woman that speaks up. Oh, wow, how different." So this is intriguing because most women are just so scared of him, so it's still very, ugh. Anyway, this is not far from the time that Artaxerxes became king. And then so a few years later, Cyrus tries to take the throne, fails. Aspasia is taken as a spoil of war by Artaxerxes because everybody had heard of her by now, like the woman that was super beautiful and spoke up to Cyrus like directly like that. So everybody heard about it. So she was brought to him in chains. And because of her reputation, Artaxerxes was mad about that. He was like, "You brought her in chains? How dare you?" He gave her, the officers that brought her in chains, he threw them in prison and gave her a bunch of presents. And then later he married her because of course he did. He married, like a bajillion people. At one point he became sad because his favorite eunuch boy, Tiridates, died. And this was a young, beautiful, the most beautiful boy of the era, apparently. And boy, he's like a 16-year-old, still really young. Not an actual boy, but very young. Anyway, and a eunuch. So, why would they do that? Well, because that's what they did. Anyway, so she gets the idea that she can get even closer in his good graces by wearing Tiridates' clothing. So she shows up in his clothing and is like, "Hey, is this giving you comfort?" And he's like, "Yes." So also around this time, it's not standard practice, or rather it's not automatic that the eldest son inherits in the Persian Empire. It was normal, but it wasn't automatic like it would be in Westeros. So his eldest son, another Darius, was named heir at this time. So the eldest in this case was named heir. And they had a custom, very much like the Carthene wedding custom, where when the Persian king names his heir, that heir is allowed to ask for a boon, a single thing that the king is not allowed to refuse. What did he ask? So remember, that's what Zaro tried to do. Zaro tried to marry Dany, and then Jorah's like, hey, you know what, Dany? Zaro is trying to trick you because there's a marriage custom in Karth where each spouse gets to ask for a favor from their spouse and they cannot refuse. He's going to ask you for a dragon. She's like, oh, damn. Yeah, he is going to do that, isn't he? So what does Darius do? He asks for Aspasia. He asks for the woman. And Artaxerxes is like, oh, damn it. I don't want to give her up. But this is very public. It's going to make me look bad. I don't want to. I already broke the law once. Remember how he offered a daughter to Tirabazis, his daughter Atosa, and then said, actually, never mind. I'm going to marry her myself. So this is a guy that has already gone too far many times. So there's nothing, you can't put this past him. But he said, okay, fine. I will grant your boon, but there's a condition. Only if she agrees to it. She has to agree. She has to basically, but he didn't phrase it like that. He said she has to choose. Aspasia has to choose between me or Darius. What a loaded question. This is a lose-lose situation for her. So she's like, I don't know what to do here. I guess I'll choose Darius because he's my future. Because Artaxerxes is older. At this point, Artaxerxes is like in his 70s. And Darius is like 50, so he's not a young man either, but still the future, more future there. So she chooses Darius, and Artaxerxes is like, all right, fine. But it ate at him. He just didn't like it. So he pulled a jerk move, as he is wont to do. He was a big proponent of the goddess Anahita. He was actually quite a builder. We didn't really talk about this much, but Artaxerxes actually built a lot of things. He was a big building project guy. And a lot of his buildings are still there. Very important structures that he had built or restored are still there. That's part of why we know a lot about him. There's a lot of like artwork that says quite a bit, stelas and carvings, things like that. So he was big on this particular goddess Anahita, who's like the goddess of waters and stuff. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to make Aspasia the high priest of Anahita, which is a position with strict celibacy. So she had to live on temple grounds in strict celibacy for the rest of her life. And Darius was mad about that, understandably. He would stew and get angry, and Tirabazis took notice. Tirabazis, who had the old marriage offer rescinded. He's like, maybe I've got an ally here, someone that's upset for similar reasons to me. So they start to talk. Nothing comes of it just yet, but give it a little time. By the way, there's a lot of people who believe the story of Aspasia is the seed for the story of Cinderella. How cool is that? It's a long line of stories that leads to that, but there's an academic tradition that believes this. It's pretty cool. Not enough time for us to talk about today, but good thing to know. We are very much reliant on your support. We are basically a 2.5 person operation here, and we aren't, we're not part of some big network or anything. We're attached to different platforms, and we do this and that, but we are basically independent. So we very much rely on your support, and we appreciate your support. We do need it. So if you're looking for some extra episodes, or you just want to help out, go to patreon.com/history of Westeros, find the support level that fits your budget and your needs, and enjoy yourself. Enjoy your supporting of us and feel good about it. We'd be very appreciative, and so would the rest of our fandom, because the more you guys support us, the more we can do. Another thing you can do is go to our website and shop through our links there. The most important one is probably the Amazon one, especially this time of year. It's a pretty convenient way to do Christmas shopping. Avoid a lot of the big crowds, get some deals, have things shipped directly to your house. It's fun to go out and shop, but you can't do all your shopping that way. Get some things from Amazon through our website and make your holiday shopping a little bit easier. Save a little time. It's a little confusing to hear the term Thespiae, the city, because it's nothing to do with the term thespian, even though it sounds almost identical. There was a guy before this era we're discussing, called Thepsis, not to be confused with Sepsis. That was his sister. No, just kidding. Thepsis was the first actor in a written play. He may have invented touring for artists, musicians, like touring in different cities and doing he may have been the first guy to do that. This series that we're discussing, this entire Greek series and into the later parts, the second series that we'll do in 2026, there's a lot of omens, right? We saw that especially last episode with the way the Thebans took the different things that were happening as they were moving towards liberating their city. And these interpretations could turn on a dime. Like, oh, this is a terrible omen. Oh, wait, that little detail, it's a great omen, or here's a different interpretation. There's nothing that changes. There's just two different people interpreting it differently. It's kind of fascinating, even at the same time being kind of weird, don't they see how inconsistent this is, how shifting ground this is? And there were some ancient Greeks that definitely toyed with atheism because it didn't make sense to them either. But for the most part, you're not going to see much of that. We continue to see things that, it's life, isn't it? Things that still happen now in 2025, like people reacting. There's still superstitions all over the world today. Not as many things that people look at as omens, but to a lesser extent they do. They just don't call them omens, People talk about things like karma and things that are meant to be, like destiny, or this happened for a reason. That's kind of a similar concept. So these are things that humans have been doing forever, since the beginning of time. It's very neat to see what their version of that was like and compare it to ours. Because like I just said, we still have it. It's just spoken of differently. We have a little bit different information. There's things we know better, but there's still so many things we don't know. So this is pretty neat. These are things that they weren't written about and thus passed down in smaller numbers, rather than just knowledge held by a whole society for generations, if not centuries, right? These are widespread beliefs of the era. War sits at the center of all this. Of course, war is the major driving factor for so much of it. When war is happening, it tends to dominate all other considerations, after all. But we're not only focused on that element. I like to insert as much as I can here that is something other than war. 376. It's a neat year for the Olympiad because the first ever Olympiad was 776. So this is the 101st Olympiad. So it's the 100 years prior, or 400 years prior was the first one. 100 years prior was the 76th Olympiad. A man named Theagenes of Thasos was the most famous athlete of his time and long before or after. It kind of depends on how you count it, but by a few different ways of counting it, Theagenes of Thasos wasn't eclipsed by an Olympic athlete until Michael Phelps, the amazing swimmer who dominated, 15 years ago was that? Maybe 20? I don't remember exactly, but this guy's records stood for 2,800 years. What? That's an athlete, y'all. In the same year of this 101st Olympiad, Nectanebo I entered his third year as Pharaoh of Egypt. The Assyrian calendar entered its year 4,375. And in China, it was the year of the wood dragon and the wood snake. I believe the dragon is the male and the snake is the female. Maybe I have it backwards. But either way, that's what's a little tidbit from China on the other side of the world. At the actual Olympiad, the naked sprint was won by Damon of Thurii. Boxing by Labax of Leprion. What a great name, Labax of Leprion. Very, very alliterative. And his alliterativeness was matched by the boys boxing winner, Crutodamus of Clytor. The pentathlon was won by Stomios of Elis. The pancration was won by Stomios of Elis. That's wild. He won the pentathlon and the mixed martial arts event. Whoa. Well, again, what an athlete. However, yeah. This guy was also a warrior. He won 3 times at the Nemean Games. Nemean line is like a Heracles reference. It's similar to the Olympic Games, but came later. This guy once killed a general from Phocion in single combat. The guy challenged him. He's like, I want to fight you, Stomios of Elis. And he's like, yeah, I'll fight you back. And he won. So in addition to Olympic glory, this guy won glory in battle. And guess what he might have been doing? Not this guy, but the current winners like Labax, Critidamus, and maybe Stomios and Damon. They probably, at least one or two of them, did the Chabrias pose. This was the Olympics right after the at ease move that became memeified throughout Greece. So, and as I told you at the time, especially Olympic victors who fought and who did events that were more like fighting, like wrestling or pancration, were the most likely to adopt that pose. So some of the winners of this year's Olympics probably did the Chabrias pose, and their statues would have been seen like that for hundreds of years. Here's a brief recap of where we've been so far. We started the series with the year 408. Now we're in 376. 408 was Lysander's year as Navarch. It was 8 years before Agesilaus becoming king, 4 years before Artaxerxes becoming king. Here we are, like I said, 376, 32 years later, both Agesilaus and Artaxerxes are still going. They could have had a showdown, too, if not for those meddling kids. I mean, Thebans. And Pharnabazus, the paymaster, giving them lots of money. And that's, again, why Agesilaus, one of many reasons why he hates Thebes. They stole his glory. They did all this other stuff. And they eat and drink. They like eating and drinking, you know, which Sparta's like, no, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't enjoy eating and drinking. And you shouldn't love so much either. It's improper. So I don't know about you all, but it's pretty easy to side with Thebes on most of these things because they're just more like us, you know, like Sparta's just so strict and militaristic and authoritative, and I don't know. I don't want to say good guys and bad guys, but it's just so easy to side with Thebes on so much of this, especially with these new figures that are arising. Some of them are just really compelling people that you kind of want to root for. Pelopidas and Epaminondas and Gorgidas, these guys, although maybe Gorgidas was older, it's not clear. But Chabrias as Athenian, a part of the youth movement. Cleombrotus, the Spartan king, different than Agesilaus. And this guy, Jason of Pherae for the straight guy, we're going to talk about soon. The latest Athenian to come on the scene was Phocion. He was born in 402, so 2 years before Agesilaus became king, 2 years after Artaxerxes. That 27-year-long Peloponnesian War ended in 404. Thus, Phocion was born right in the calamitous era, right after that failure, that big loss. He's part of that generation that stood in the shadow of their past generations that had so much more power. So he and his generation really wanted to help regain some of that. But he wasn't ambitious in the same kind of way. He had a lot of morals. He had a lot of ethics, and he was very much like Stannis. I said Epaminondas is a bit like Stannis, but maybe Epaminondas is more like Corran Halfhand and Rhaegar, with a little bit of Stannis. Phocion is almost pure Stannis, which I will demonstrate via quote.
Demosthenes once said to Phocion that he might be killed someday if the people became irrational. Phocion responded, "Yes, however, they would kill you if they came to their senses."
It's pretty good. He was an orator of sorts, but he didn't like orators. His existence was a pushback against orators because he would try to do things like that. He would try to communicate a lot with one sentence, whereas the orators would just say so much. They would speak flowery this, convincing that, reference this anecdote, that, all these different things to sway opinion, where Phocion he didn't like that. He was like, no, just say what you mean, be blunt, let people decide on the basis of facts only, no persuasion. So he was blunt and efficient and made a point of it to push back against the current trend of orations. Now at this period, he's only 20 years old. So he's already like kind of acts like an old man, like a stodgy old man, a get off my lawn kind of guy. But he's already in the military, already serving, already trying to help Athens restore their glory. His grandfather, another Phocion, was a commander of a ship in the Peloponnesian War and was killed in action. This guy was also a pupil of Plato. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Phocion, pupil of Plato. He was also a friend of the famous philosopher Xenocrates. Another couple of quotes from Phocion, just because he's so good. Remember that comment that Stannis made about Robert and how, like, Robert could piss in a cup and everybody would praise the vintage. I give them clean water and they sniff at it and stare at it in suspicion. He's lamenting how the truth doesn't matter to these people. They care more about who the words come from. That is a bigger bellwether to them on truth than the words being spoken and the facts, the data, whatever backs it up, whatever evidence there is. So Phocion's equivalent comment here is, my frown never yet made any of you sad, but these jolly men have given you plenty of sorrow, right? So he's saying his, attitude, his toughness, his bluntness, yeah, it might upset you, but it's not going to cause real problems in your life. But these happy, positive orators, they've led us to calamity. They're happy, but that doesn't mean that their results have been good. Don't fool yourself like that. At another time, there was a man who was speaking to the crowds and he was trying to play humble. Like, no, but I'm a humble man. I'm a humble man. And Phocion said, don't be so humble. You're not that great. It's like only someone who's really great should be has cause to act humble. It's like, you're not actually that great though. Another time he said something and the crowd cheered him. And he doesn't like a claim. He's like, I must have said, he said, have I unwittingly said something vile? Because he couldn't understand why the crowd, he's like, if the crowd is cheering me, I must have said something awful. Because if I've gotten popular acclaim, like he associates popular acclaim with negativity. So yeah. So he's going to be a part of our story for a while as both a speaker and a soldier, such as our next event, the Battle of Naxos. Now, at this point, remember, Athens wasn't actually trying that hard to beat Sparta. After 2 years of helping Thebes fight off Sparta, they didn't really get much out of it. They became more concerned with not so much as beating Sparta, but not letting Sparta beat Thebes so they could maintain that balance of power. Partly because if Sparta's fighting Thebes on land, that frees them up to go back to their maritime power and try to bring back their empire over the Aegean and the Mediterranean, which would bring them back to dominance. So, and again, remember, they're still trying to tell people that, hey, we're going to be allies this time. We're not going to dominate you. Mm-hmm. Sparta saw this coming, though. They sussed this all out. They're like, Athens is just going to try to reestablish their empire while we're slogging it out with Thebes. They're going to go over there. We're going to have to stop that. So they attempted to repeat one of Lysander's strategies. They deployed the Admiral Paulus with 60 ships to repeat the Antalcidas plan, which was to go send these ships to the Black Sea and stop the grain shipments, cut Athens off from its grain supply. They have to import grain. So this was their plan, to try to mess up Athens. But Athens figured this out. They got wind of it either because they saw it coming, because it's an obvious enough counter strategy. They'd seen it happen already, so they could see it coming the second time. So they sent out Cabrius with 84 triremes, 20,000 men, and some siege engines. So he went out there to the grain ships and escorted them. Like, aha, you're not going to get us like that. Brings the grain ships into Athens. And so they're brought in unmolested. The food got there. But he's still got the ships, so he goes over to Naxos, which was a island that's pro-Spartan. Naxos is in the middle of the Aegean. It's like really near the center. Legend says Zeus himself was raised in a cave on Naxos, and it's the place that Theseus abandoned Ariadne, if you're familiar with your story of Theseus. By the way, if you want to read a fictionalized version of the story of Theseus, I highly recommend The King Must Die by Mary Renault, and the sequel, The Bull from the Sea. Both books, Life of Theseus, super interesting. Her imagination of the ancient world is really unparalleled. So Paulus arrived anyway. He arrived to interfere with the siege. He couldn't stop the grain ships, so he decided to attack Cabrius's fleet, so that way maybe they could get the grain ships next time or something. Just try to establish dominance one way or the other. So the two navies face each other about 3 miles apart. And as they got closer, there was something became apparent to the Spartans. Chabrias was using trickery, as was his wont. He, against tradition, ordered all his ships to remove insignias. It's like basically going into battle without sigils. He's like, hey, all you guys, imagine a Westerosi battle. He's like, no, take all your badges off. None of you are wearing any of your clothes that indicate what house you came from. And so this threw the Spartans into confusion because they didn't know who were the allied ships. They didn't know which were the Athenian ships. And that mattered to them because they really wanted to hit Athens the most. And well, so that affected their morale a little bit. They didn't quite know what to do. It gave Chabrias a little bit of an advantage. So it was kind of like a phalanx battle where you have the right facing the right and the left facing the left, where the strongest guys are on the right side. My right here, you're right here. And Paulus overwhelmed the Athenian left and killed the squadron commander over there. Chabrias, sitting back watching the battle unfold, sees the collapse of his left, sends his reserves, commanded by Phocion, to reinforce that part of the battle. Now, Phocion did the job really well. Phocion's 20 ships came over, restored the battle lines over there, and eventually the Athenians won. The Spartan fleet retreated as Chabrias, despite how confident he was, he did not pursue them, even though he could have done serious damage because, again, recovering the bodies. You got to recover the bodies. You got to, even though it sacrificed a distinct military advantage, collecting the bodies of the slain is just that important. Remember, way back in the Peloponnesian War, I think I told you all this, there was a famous battle that Athens won, but there was a storm about to come, so they had to leave, which meant leaving the bodies behind. So even though Athens won this big war, and this big battle, and the war had been raging for decades, they were so mad about the not collecting the bodies that they executed all the generals. What? Yeah, so Chabrias was clearly worried about that. But this is also a really big deal because this is the first battle Athens won at sea with their own ships since the Peloponnesian War. They had won other sea battles since then, but those were Persian ships or Persian-funded ships. This is their own ships that they built with their own crews, with their own money. So that gave them a boost in terms of city pride. They're like, all right, we are restoring our strength. We beat Sparta. We did our job. We got this two young commanders doing really well. We're getting back in the swing of things. This somewhat restored their supremacy in the Aegean, certainly put the Aegean on notice. Persia took note again. Lots of things happened. Now, this battle happened on the same day as the Eleusinian Mysteries, which is, quote, the most famous of the secret religious rites of ancient Greece. It's a cult of Demeter and Persephone. Persephone was kidnapped by Hades, if you recall your myths, and this was resolved by Persephone has to spend half the year in Hades living with him and the other half above ground. That's why we have seasons, according to the myths, right? Winter and autumn are when Persephone is in Hades, or with Hades down in the underworld, and when spring and summer come when she's above ground. So that's interesting, and it would have certainly given the Athenians even more like additional, like the gods are on our side. This happens on the same day as these really important ritual rites, whatever. So that's good for their morale. And they were so pleased. Chabrias was awarded exemption from liturgies. What does that mean? And his descendants. Chabrias and his descendants granted exemption from the liturgies. What does that mean? Well, rich people are supposed to pay taxes for certain religious processions and other stuff. It's basically a tax break. Let's just keep it simple. Tax break. And his descendants. But Chabrias was just such a big spender. He's a rich guy that loved to flaunt his wealth and spend. So he's like, nah, I don't need to be exempt. I'm going to keep spending money on stuff and getting credit for it. So what you have here is Chabrias, brilliantly talented, flaunts his wealth, very outward, extroverted guy. Phocion working for him, they're really like an ice and fire combo. Cabrius is fiery and all over the place, but very talented. Phocion, very talented too, but very calm and collected and kind of icy demeanor. Make a good pair. Make a good team. Even though Cabrius is in charge, he's not that much older than Phocion. Now, meanwhile, Thebes has capitalized on Agesilaus' not terribly effective invasions and their win over Phoibidos. Very gradually, they started getting rid of all the different Spartan garrisons in their territories. One by one in Boeotia, they got rid of all the Spartan garrisons and replaced them with native garrisons. Thespiae, yep. Also Tanagra, where they slew a guy called Panthoidas. And Plataea, they just destroyed it. They're like, nah, screw this town. We're sick of it. They burned it to the ground. Except a city called Orchomenus. Orchomenus was the last city in Boeotia that was still Spartan. Pelopidas was determined to fix that, to get that one city back. Now, he learned through his agents, his spies, that the Spartan garrison at Orchomenus was about to leave and head to go to Locris to do some fighting up there. So he's like, oh, here's our chance. Let's attack the town right when that garrison is gone before they come back. And we'll probably get some help from the locals. They'll probably rise up and help us because, well, they're Boeotians. They see which way the wind is blowing. They don't want Sparta ruling them. It's a reasonable plan. So he takes the Sacred Band, which is ironically the garrison of Thebes, and some cavalry. So not a huge army, just enough to maybe accomplish this goal while there's no Spartan garrison there. So they rush to Orchomenus. They go there as quick as they can. And as they arrive, like, oops, another Spartan garrison arrives. So it wasn't actually a blind spot for Sparta. They didn't just send the garrison away, leaving the city undefended. They spent the garrison away and replaced it with another one from the south. So Pelopidas is like, oops, our intelligence wasn't so intelligent. So he decides, let's just go back. Let's get out of here. This isn't going to work. So they're walking back home, and on their way, they run right into the original army that they were trying to attack Orchomenus while this army was gone. So the one that they were dodging, like, uh-oh, we just ran into the army we were trying to avoid. 2 Spartan Mora. That's their military distinction for this. It's kind of like a legion, but a different term. Anyway, one of them was led by Gorgolion, one by Theopompus. Looked like the secret band had outplayed themselves, it seemed. A member of the band is supposed to have supposedly recognized this conundrum, this trap they had put themselves into, and said, quote,
"We are fallen into our enemy's hands." Pelopidas responded,
"And why not they into ours?" Battle was on. There's no way to avoid it. Pelopidas was not scared, despite being outnumbered and facing the Spartans, who still haven't been beaten on land in centuries with a full Spartan army. So this is the birthplace of Apollo, by the way. This area, this region, this is right where this battle happened. It's called the Battle of Tegyra. And yeah, that's where Apollo was supposedly born. So there's a little extra vibe there. A standard battle plan never going to work here, right? For Pelopidas. 1,200 infantry versus something like 300 or 400. Remember, the Sacred Band is 300 guys, and maybe they had a few extras, but not much. The Thebans did have some cavalry, as we said, and the Spartans probably had no cavalry because this is a garrison. Garrisons, cavalry, that doesn't really usually happen. On the other hand, there's not a lot of room to maneuver. They're in a mountain pass sort of situation here, so cavalry isn't at its most effective. So Pelopidas, dynamic leader that he was, ordered his men to pack tighter than normal. Like, you have a phalanx formation. They're like, no, actually stand even closer together than normal. I want you to guys like elbow to elbow, like you're touching the guy next to you. It may have looked to the Spartans like they were taking a brave last stand. Like, all right, we're not going to go down easy. We're going to get close, and it's going to be really hard for you to kill us. But we're gonna face you. We're gonna go down fighting. So the Spartans advance. They're like, all right, we got 1,200 versus your 300. We're going to encircle you, right? We're going to get all our guys around you. And then you're screwed. But Pelopidas is like, okay, I see you coming, spreading out to get around us. So as soon as they spread out to encircle them, he says, charge. Not just run as fast as possible. This was not a desperate plan. This was a man who found confidence in a tough spot. To avoid encirclement, they didn't just charge this straight ahead to try to break free. No. They charged the Spartan left where the leaders were. The two main commanders, Gorgolian and Theopompus, were, plus all the lieutenants, the sub-officers. Went right at them. So he didn't just try to get away. He went for the so-called head of the snake. Now, this is a big deal. This is pretty clever because the Spartans are so military hierarchical defined that his idea was, well, hey, if we can maybe take out the leaders, their army will descend into confusion and they won't, their command structure will break down and they won't know what to do. And that'll give us a big advantage. So, and he was not holding back. He put himself at the front. This is like a spearhead of wedge of dudes charging forward at a full run, just like with wild abandon, just going at him, going at the most intimidating, fearsome army that's been so for centuries. So this was very unexpected. The Spartans didn't expect to get charged by the smaller army. And the Spartans were very surprised by this strategy and did not adapt to it. They were trying to attack the sides of the sacred band, but meanwhile, the sacred band is attacking the leaders of the much larger Spartan phalanx. The Theban cavalry may have bought them some extra time by, keeping the encirclement from being as quick as it could have been. Either way, they did it. They attacked the left. The surprise maneuver was, the Spartans didn't adapt to it. And Gorgolion and Theopompus and several sub-commanders were killed. And this revealed a weakness in the Spartan authoritarian system. The soldiers, remember, we said these guys are like unsullied. Their training is unbelievably brutal. They're taught not just to fight, but to accept death and do things that are immoral in order to win. It's just, like the whole puppy strangling thing from the Unsullied. Spartans had to do similar things. So what they're supposed to always follow their leaders. But what happens when all the leaders are dead? They're waiting for orders that aren't going to come. They're not good at independent thinking. They're not good at thinking on the fly. This isn't where they've been trained. So what happens when your commanders are too busy fighting for their lives against these crack troops from the Thebans? What happens when they're dead? Well, that's what happened. They found out what happens when your leaders are dead. Pelopidas and the sacred band just pressed the advantage. Rather than after killing the leaders, they didn't move on and escape. Their phalanx broke outward and it kept attacking, mowing down these confused, absolutely starstruck, completely flummoxed. How can this happen? How can we be losing? What is going on? We outnumber them 4-1. So just like Cabrius, they couldn't pursue. The Spartans ran away from 4 times more men, and they ran away. They were just so confused. They didn't know what to do. So they couldn't chase them very far, though, because Orchomenus was nearby, and that other garrison was there. So we beat this group. We don't know if we could beat them if they were twice as large. Now, so they would be feeling really good about this. The cavalry probably picked off some stragglers, and then they went back home. Now, I don't know what happened to Gorgidas. Gorgidas was the commander of the sacred band just prior, right? He's the one who, his men, his commands, they killed Phoibidas. But at this point, he just kind of disappears from the record. I have 2 guesses. I think my guess is he went back to being a cavalry commander because that's where he started as. And the sacred band is infantry, and he might have been needed there more. He did his term as leader, and they moved on. It could have also been that the nature of the sacred band was that you fight beside your lover. Well, what happens if your lover is dead or injured or doesn't exist? You aren't in the sacred band. We don't know how they handled things like that, but that could be it. You don't have a partner, so you don't really fit in the group anymore. Now, also a change that Pelopidas made here that stuck was Gorgodas, in that first encounter, he had the sacred band spread out, stiffening the ranks throughout, giving confidence to some guys here, some guys here, some guys here. And Pelopidas said, nah, actually, this should be a single unit that doesn't spread out, just the elite crack squad, the stormtroopers of sort, the shock troops. Whereas the rest of the levies can still do their thing. We can take the lead, but we don't want to be spread out. We're more effective when we're packed together. And here's another quote from Plutarch. He thought that brave men were most ardent and serviceable in a common cause when they inspired one another with a zeal for high achievement. And this is building on the idea of the sacred band saying, hey, yeah, you fight better when you're standing next to your lover because that's the person you would least want to shame, most want to impress. And that's part of why having them all packed together adds to that impact, that effect. It's like a geometrical, growth of that concept. So this is really big deal. The idea that Sparta could be beaten on land was pretty shocking, but by a smaller army was just overwhelming. Like many people in Greece heard that and were like, nah, that didn't happen. This is fake news. But it really happened. The morale boost was enormous. Thebes had never, ever erected a trophy against a full Spartan army. Now, they did that against Phoibidas, but that was mostly Thespian soldiers. It's one thing for Sparta to get outspent or out-intrigued or to lose on the sea, but to lose on land, that was the one thing they could count on. They could not be beaten on land. This was real change. The whole Greek world took notice, and Sparta would be eager to correct that view. It's like, hey, we got to get people back to thinking we can't be beaten. We got to get some wins to, bring this back around. But they just kept making small mistakes. Things kept not going well for them. You can kind of see maybe a little bit of problem from not having Agesilaus available. The guy's still bedridden from that nasty foot thing that happened. He's still hanging on. He's not dead, but he might die. Like, there's definitely worry that could happen. So another incident happened that did not look good for Sparta and did look good for Athens. This doesn't have anything to do with Thebes in this case. Now, there's an island off the coast of Athens called Euboea. It's pretty big. It's maybe like the size of Fair Isle. And it's a little similar to Fair Isle in some ways, in which it's a very nice place and it grows a lot of crops. It feeds it fulfills some of Athens's large food needs. So a Spartan named Alcetus had captured it and was in charge of holding it. And he held the center fortress, whatever, with his men. But at night, he would sneak out of the fortress to go see his boyfriend, some young man in Euboea that he liked, that he had an affair with or had a tryst with. Not an affair, because that makes it sound like he's doing something wrong. Well, he was doing something wrong, but the affair wasn't the problem. It was he was shirking his duty as a military commander. Because one of these nights, while he went to go see his boyfriend, the locals revolted and seized the fort back. So he just, it looks real bad, doesn't it? You're supposed to be the Spartan commander, and why did you allow this to... Well, I was hooking up with my boyfriend. Sorry. So yeah, that's also embarrassing. So Sparta's embarrassments are mounting here. Let's take a diversion to the north. I've been saying all along, I've been teasing this all along, that the northern states are going to become a problem. So let's get to them a bit. Let's explain what's happening there and set them up. There's some very fun stuff happening there. But first, a little extra update on Persia. They're still slowly preparing that attack on Egypt, right? They're like, okay, got to get Egypt back. But we're not going to move quickly on this. Like I said, we'll get to that next episode. Meanwhile, Tiribasis, he's upset that Artaxerxes reneged on marrying his daughter Atossa, right? Now, something that made all that worse that, yes, Tiribazus was offered Atossa, Pharnabazus was offered a different daughter, and the third guy was offered a different daughter. Those two got to have their Persian princesses. There was no reneging in their case. So he maybe felt a little singled out, right? So Artaxerxes gets around to making up to Tiribazus. And even though Tiribazus is plotting with Darius, who was wronged in the issue of Aspasia, Artaxerxes maybe sniffs this out or gets wind of it. We don't know, but either way, Artaxerxes says, okay, look, I'm sorry. I'll offer you my daughter, Amestris, instead, a different princess. Still a royal princess, still a daughter of him and Cythera, same lineage. He wouldn't do it again, would he? He wouldn't renege a second time, would he? Yeah, he would. He did. He did it again. He offered Tiribazus his daughter again, changed his mind again, married her himself again. Most likely, Parysatis pushed him to it. But what the hell? Yeah, this really, this is Aegon the Unworthy, isn't it? With a mother who's like Visenya the Unworthy, just like pushing him to do these things. It's crazy. It's like they have a whole team. Anyway, so Tiribazus again goes to Darius like, look, you're kidding me, right? Like, look what your father did to me. He promised you that you're the heir, right? But can you trust this guy? Look what he did to me. What happens if he reneges on making you the heir? And well, Darius is like, well, would that be so bad? I guess, I don't want that, but I want to be the king, but is it that bad? He's like, well, if your brother Ocus becomes king instead of you, that's bad, right? And he thinks and Artaxerxes thinks for a minute. He's like, yeah, that would be bad. Or sorry, Darius thinks for a minute and says, yeah, that would be bad. Ocus is a very violent, murderous guy. So if Ocus became king, he would have me executed. Now you could become king and you wouldn't execute Ocus because you're not like that. So you should be king. You're the better man for it. So Tiribazus really gets his hooks into Darius, and Darius is very willing to listen because they've both been wronged very similarly over a woman or multiple women in the case of Tiribazus. So they have a lot in common here. Meanwhile, this Ocus, who I just mentioned, he approaches Atossa, the daughter the first one that was offered, and that's his sister. Atossa is Ocus' sister, and he starts to plot with her. And he says, look at all this happening around us. I'm going to maneuver. I'm going to be king one day. You just wait and watch. And if you help me do that, I'm going to reward you, sister. Maybe I'll make you my wife. And so she starts listening. So multiple plots are happening here. We got two different sons of Artaxerxes plotting against him with the help of Tiribazus, who, of course, was a very powerful, important leader. Now, Artaxerxes hears about this battle of Naxos, the win of Cabrius over Paulus. And he's like, all right, you guys, what about the king's peace? Weren't we agreeing to stop all this? So he sends emissaries and like, hey, let's get this back on. Stop it. And Athens is very amenable to it because, again, they aren't really excited about fighting Sparta. They just don't want Thebes and Sparta to be imbalanced. So they're all about it. So we'll come back to that as the rest of the Greek states decide what to do about Persia in trying to reestablish the king's peace. Unfortunately, around this time, Parysatis just disappears from the record. She's just gone. But she was in her 90s. So, natural death, very likely. I guess she never, and if that is how she dies, then, karma did not get her. She did lots of awful things to lots of people, and she died of old age. So never really got her just desserts. So yeah, let's talk about these northern powers of Greece, some of which are considered partly Greek, but some of them aren't. It's a little column A, a little column B. Some of them want to be considered Greek because Greece is the cultural center, like Greece proper, like Athens. They just want to be a part of that. You want to be part of where the high society is. This is how it works, right? Now, one of the reasons the northern region was becoming more important, more dangerous, more powerful was because that region, speaking from a very high level, was transitioning from tribal existence to statehood. But not like the other Greek states. They weren't becoming city-states. They were becoming monarchies or things very like it. And we're talking about the states of Thrace, Molossus/Epirus, Macedonia, Thessaly, and Illyria. Now, let me diverge just a minute to kind of give you all an idea of where everything is. I came up with a little bit of a shortcut for explaining the map visually or verbally. Hopefully this isn't a fire hose of information, but I think it should be able to help you all picture some of this a little bit better. Imagine Greece on the left, Turkey on the right. The Aegean Sea is in between them, separating the two. Lots of little islands in between. Now, put a clock right in the middle of that, okay? 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, that's Thrace, which is Bulgaria and Romania now. And they also control the Hellespont, the crossing from Asia to Europe. So it's kind of like controlling the twins, but only one half of it instead of both halves, right? 2 o'clock. To me, this is 2 o'clock. For you guys, it'd be this way, if you're looking at me. Troy, Phrygia, and the other side of the connection, Hellespont, the Bosporus, it's called now. That's where Pharnabazus had control for a while. 3 o'clock, Ionia and Lydia. 4 o'clock, Caria and the island of Rhodes, which is where the Colossus will be built in another 100 years or so. 5 o'clock is open sea. Nothing there. If you keep going that direction, you'll eventually hit Libya and Egypt. By the way, Libya had the best horses at this time. Straight south, 6 o'clock is Crete, which used to be a dominating power, now not so much. Directly east of Crete, 500 miles, is Cyprus, which we've come up a few times. 7 o'clock, open sea and the island of Tegyra, which you can ignore. Nothing really at 7 o'clock. 8 o'clock, very important. That's where Laconia, that's Sparta, Messenia, which is conquered and enslaved by Sparta, and Arcadia, which is just north of it and very often at war with Sparta or dominated by Sparta. That's also near where Corinth is. 9 o'clock is where Attica is. That's Athens. Just above that is Boeotia. That's Thebes. And Delphi is near there, which is the Oracle of Delphi, where they get a lot of their prophecies and things like that. At 10 o'clock would be Thessaly, Molossus, and Epirus. That's modern Albania and also parts of Romania, Bulgaria. And at 11 o'clock, Macedonia, which is still Macedonia today. And that's also where the Chalcidian League is. And if you go past Macedonia to the northwest, you get to Illyria, which was the most tribal nation of all these nations that are ceasing to be so tribal. But the most important of all these states is definitely Thessaly right now. In the year 375, it's Jason of Pherae. Pherae for the bye guy. He continued to extend his dominance. Not just his home region, but all places, now including Epirus. He made their king, Alcetus, a subject. More on them in a minute. Now, he was sort of following the model of that Syracusan tyrant Dionysius that we've mentioned a few times in terms of how he grew his power. He got some money. He hired some mercenaries. He got more power with the mercenaries that enabled him to keep paying those mercenaries and then get more mercenaries. And then farther up the ladder, that enabled him to get actual state power so he could call up troops, levies, and things like that, which supplements his mercenaries. So now he's got 2 armies, basically. But Dionysius' leadership style, other than that, very different. He was more of a Persian-style king, feared more than respected, threw his money around a lot, steeped in luxury, you know. Jason's mercenaries were actually loyal to him because they respected him. He paid them well. He paid them semi-permanently. Kind of that was the idea, that they would not have to look for work. They could just work for him for as long as the future could seems to be held. He would train with them. He would march with them. He would lead by example. Persians don't do that, right? That never happens. Dionysius didn't do that. He was a big overweight guy that would just give orders and sit back on his big chair. Certainly Artaxerxes isn't doing that, right? So this is a new style of leader, a guy who's extremely competent and really willing to do the work, really willing to put himself at risk and put in a lot of effort. And a lot of people respected this. This is a very virtuous thing to do as a Greek in this era. Xenophon, our soldier author, quoted Jason as saying this.
I have men of other states as mercenaries to the number of 6,000, with whom, as I think, no city could easily contend. As for numbers, he said, Of course, as great a force might march out of some other city also. But armies made up of citizens include men who are already advanced in years, and others who have not yet come to their prime. Furthermore, in every city, very few men train their bodies, but among my mercenaries, no one serves unless he is able to endure as severe toils as I myself.
So he started with quality over quantity, but then he started adding quality to the quantity to that quality, I guess you could say. It sounds a lot like the Golden Company, but as if they were hired semi-permanently, like a group of sellswords who are cut above in terms of their trustworthiness and their general personage. But they're not exiles like the Golden Company. However, they would want to live in these other places and be accepted by Greeks. And some of them would be exiles. That's why they're mercenaries, because they got kicked out of their home city-state. Some of them would be from Athens or Thebes or even Sparta or other places we haven't talked about. A lot of them are just from Thessaly, where Jason's from too, the majority of them. But still, he's looking for quality, not what nation you're from or anything else. He just wants people that can hang with him in terms of marching for many hours and handling physical exertions and all that stuff. And even more so, these mercenaries were motivated because he was such a different kind of leader that was willing to pay them for the long term. Well, they know that that's almost certainly going to end if he dies. So they were very motivated to keep him alive and to help him with his goals, because he wasn't one of these leaders that just uses people to get ahead without giving them anything. Yeah, he used people to get ahead, but he would make sure they were rewarded and that they came out on top and were respected, right? There's nothing like Artaxerxes or an Agesilaus who is like, you do what I say, not what I do. You know, I'm above you. I have a different set of rules for me. No, he was a lot, even though he was extremely ambitious, extremely confident, and extremely like, I'm better than you. He's just super nice about it, super diplomatic about it. You know, nothing you could say would upset him. Nothing you could say would, he would just look at it as like, oh, I'm just going to one up you. I'm going to find a way to one up this, you know, but not in a way that insults you, in a way that just proves I'm better. Not in a way that I have to fight you to beat you, but I will do that. So he didn't lead by fear, but you knew he could be fearsome. So he was like a Daemon Blackfire in a lot of ways. He was more dynamic because he had a broader skill set. Maybe not, you know, a once-in-a-generation warrior, but a very gifted warrior too. Has a lot of similar qualities. Physically gifted, charismatic, a shining ideal of what men in his era were supposed to be, an avatar of current cultural virtues. Daemon was seen as the perfect Westerosi knight. Jason was the perfect Greek soldier. They were both people whose birth gave them a lot of advantages and privileges, yet were more esteemed for their abilities than for their birth. They were more virtuous than deserving. They were both, but it was their virtues that really stood out, their achievements, their capacity, rather than who their father was, who their mother was, what their last name was. So they both also represented cultural shifts. Daemon Blackfire represented knighthood. He was chivalrous. He was anti-Dornish. He was warrior culture. He was pushing back against the maesters and poets and artists that populated Daeron II's court. Jason was chivalrous before that word existed, before the era of chivalry, before the era of knighthood. I mean, the term knight was used in this era, but of course it had a different connotation than medieval knights. So he was aggressive, but also didn't use aggression as his first tool. Mostly he would be like, look, join me. And he would try to convince you to join him by pointing out the alternative. Look, do you really want to fight me? Look how good I am. Look how talented I am. Look how strong I am. But he wouldn't put it like that. He wouldn't phrase it like arrogantly. He would just kind of put it in plain terms. Look, I got 20,000 men. My men are stronger. They're in better shape. I pay them better. Just be realistic here, man. You can't beat that. So just join me. Yeah, it is very convincing. A lot of people are like, yeah, you're right. We can't beat that. And he is a really impressive guy. And this is not a guy that talks himself up. This is a guy that proves himself. Yeah, he really does go out there and march all day, march all night in armor, and can handle running in full kit for miles and just all these exertions and physical challenges like that. People respect that. No matter what the scenario, Jason would claim superiority and he'd have a strong case. Now, I have to mention Renly as a comparison here too, which some of you might have seen coming because I have often compared Renly to Daemon Blackfyre too. So it's like a three-way comparison here. Someone whose claim to supremacy was legally chintzy, if not just completely bogus, but overlooked due to sheer popularity. Like he made up for it because he was just so talented or so popular or both so charismatic. That's Renly, right? Everybody's like, Renly, you're not, Stannis is ahead of you, but no one cared. Only Stannis really cared. Everybody's like, yeah, you're right about that, but I don't care. We still like Renly more. And Renly was not, like, this is why, Robert had some of those qualities too, but Robert was easily angered. Robert was really proud. Robert drank and ate a lot. And he slept around a lot too. Renly didn't. Renly wasn't a big drinker, big eater, didn't sleep around a lot. And given Greek men were very bisexual in this era, Jason probably had male lovers like Renly. Well, Renly probably just had the one lover in Loras, but same point. Comparing Jason to Artaxerxes, though, this is where you really get to a lot of the heart of the matter. This is, you kind of get to what Jason was doing in terms of his public persona and the image he was trying to cultivate. This reminds me of the analysis we've done in comparing Valyria to Andal cultures, or Andal values, which is that the Andal virtues and cultural values developed as a response to Valyria. Some of you have heard this before, but let me recap briefly. Valyrians, what do they do to the weak? They enslave them. The Andal answer to that was knighthood, chivalry. Protect the weak. Don't enslave them, protect them. Valyrians, incest, polygamy, all that. Andals, monogamy. That's it. Bastards, bad. Multiple wives, bad. Incest, real bad. Okay, like very much the opposite, right? So a lot of these, you can keep going on with these comparisons, but there's, I think that's the basic point of it. And these comparisons, as I said, very much apply to Jason versus Artaxerxes. Persia ruled by authority, not by example. Now, Jason was using money to get ahead, like Persia does, but not in the same way. He approached it differently. Rather than just, Persia would overwhelm with just enormous numbers of soldiers. Jason's like, no. We're going to go with quality over quantity. So instead of bribes, which is what Persia would do a lot with a lot of their extra money, what Jason would do is invest into military infrastructure, to hiring the best people, effectively making them not mercenaries anymore, making them loyal to him. And this would pull mercenaries from lots of different places. So he would be pulling the best talent into his army, making it unavailable to anyone else. Because he wasn't just recruiting, like I said, from his own territory. So that leading by example alone is a good example of how different he was than the Persians. They don't do that for the most part. This is a man who inserts himself into power and shows why he deserves it, rather than a man who sees his power and expects you to go along with it and violently asserts that. This is a guy that says, look, I'm good enough. I deserve this. Who's better than me? And everybody's like, yeah, well, okay. You're kind of right. So it's like, this is why I think he may have done this on purpose. He cultivated this image because this is a guy that talked about going to war with Persia, that maybe Greece should conquer Persia, maybe we could do that. So it would be entirely fitting for him to position himself as the best man for that job, as the ultimate anti-Persian person. There's an anecdote where Artaxerxes led his troops on the march back from Cadusia. Cadusia was the place where they almost starved to death, the place that Tiribazus kind of saved them with his Samwell Tarly ruse, and Datames did great service. But when Artaxerxes led the troops himself personally when they were coming home, morale went up so much just from him doing that they were able to travel faster than normal. Like they marched faster when Artaxerxes was leading the army. But of course they didn't learn from that. Like, oh, well, this is a one-off. We won't use you at the head again. Nah, we can't do that. You're too much of a god king. You're too luxurious. Your authority derives from all the bling you wear, not from your deeds. They're too steeped in that way of thinking. So Jason didn't want you to bow to him. He wanted you to respect him so much that you wanted to follow him. Charisma mixed with respect, if not admiration, perhaps even love. But yeah, fear too. Like, yes, you're encouraged to join him, but there is that gauntlet beneath the silk glove. He will absolutely destroy you if you don't. He had that confidence that was kind of like Jaehaerys. How, remember Rhaegar Baratheon when he finally admitted that he'd done wrong. He's like, I'm sorry, Jaehaerys, I shouldn't have, tried to unseat you. Please don't destroy my family. I'll take the black. And Jaehaerys is like, no, you were trying to serve the realm. I think your heart was in the right place. It's better if you serve me. We're all better off if you're on my team rather than you just going off and ending your career. And I'm certainly not going to destroy your house. You just have to be on my side. And that's fine. He's like, okay, I'll do that. Absolutely, I'll do that. Do you want hostages? And he's like, I don't need hostages, man. I got my dragon. And Rhaegar at that point realized that all of Westeros is Jaehaerys' hostage. When you have dragons, the entire continent is your hostage. That's why you don't need them. That's the confidence Jaehaerys has. That's the confidence Jason had. He's like, yeah, I just know I'm better. I know you aren't better. I know I'm going to win. It's not bravado. It's just a deep-seated, sincere belief in himself. While the great Persian kings showed off absurd amounts of luxury, Artaxerxes is said to have 12,000 talents worth of accoutrement on him at all times. Do you remember how much a talent was? You could pay like a soldier, like many soldiers for a year with one talent. So, whoa. While Jason just kind of dressed like maybe a little bit nicer than a regular soldier would, a little bit of bling just to show off who he was, just a little bit of flair, but certainly not covered in gold and jewelry, Persia, you got to bow and scrape and kneel. The Greeks were like the free folk in this era. Kneelers, that's to be mocked. Yeah, they don't do that. So Artaxerxes had a harem. He had over 200 children. He drank the finest wines, ate only delicacies on golden platters. What did Dunk say to Makar about Arion? I bet he never slept in ditches. He only ate bloody meat. The Greeks don't look up to that. That's not a thing to aspire to. That's weakness. That's overdoing it. That's going too far. That's gluttony. That's not virtuous. So Jason only had children with his wife and was extremely disciplined with his pleasures, with his food and drink. Artaxerxes had flatterers, courtiers. Jason learned from and debated with scholars and philosophers, including the famous philosopher Isocrates. It's very confusing that there was a famous Socrates and an Isocrates who almost lived at the same time. Isocrates at this time would have been just past his 60th birthday. Well established, famous philosopher, very well known. He and Jason corresponded. Artaxerxes isn't corresponding with philosophers. And Isocrates encouraged Jason to unite the people. He was a proponent of a unified Greece. So that's part of an angle here. Even their names are very different. Even that expresses the dichotomy here. Artaxerxes means king of heroes, or the great king, or righteous ruler. The second of those is my favorite because he's already the great king. So his name is like, he's the great king, the great king. That's what his full name translates to. Jason just means healer or to heal. Way more humble than king of heroes. Artaxerxes occasionally had nobles executed just because he didn't like them or because he was mad. And of course, his mother probably encouraged that sometimes for her own ends, although sometimes probably because he really was in danger. She may have just made up threats against him to get a result, but that tactic was effective in part because murder of Persian kings was not uncommon. Now, Jason was very Renly Baratheon in this. Not only did Renly make friends from foes like Robert did, he was fairly immune to insults and slights on his pride. He would to him, that's just the nattering of children. To him, that's the Tywin Lannister attitude. The lion does not concern itself with the opinions of the sheep, and everyone's a sheep to him. Jason's the only lion, kind of in his mind. Now, to be fair, these are both slave societies. Everyone had slaves pretty much in this era. There are a few exceptions, and we'll praise them when they come along for being making the world a better place very slowly in a very hard way. But the Persians were way more about that. The Persians had way more slaves and treated their slaves a lot less like people. So, yeah. Now, Jason tried to talk a guy named Polydamas of Pharsalus into joining him. Pharsalus was the last big holdout in the kingdom of Thessaly, or the region of Thessaly, and is a big city. So it's really important. So he tried to talk him into, but Polydamas, first he just declined, because they were friends of Sparta. So Jason, again, just takes the high road. He's like, all right, your loyalty to Sparta, you're not breaking the deal. That's exactly why I want men like you. You should be praised for sticking to your guns. To what you agreed to do this, you're sticking to it. I honor you for that. So rather than being like, man, I'm gonna kill you. But he also says that. First, he praises him for his character, his virtue. But then he says, but if you don't join me, I'm going to march on you. Just be aware, I'm going to come one way or the other. This is happening. So here's what you should do. Go to Sparta. I'll let you go. I won't stop you. Go to Sparta. Ask for help. See what they say. If they help you, be careful. Make sure they send you enough men. If they don't send you enough men, then I'm going to win, and you've just sent a lot of men to their deaths for no reason. If they don't send you enough men, come back to me and say, never mind, and I will join you. It's not too late. You can change your mind. You can get all the way to the day of battle and then change your mind if you want. But if Sparta doesn't offer help, then what choice do you have, right? Come on, be smart. So Polydamas did exactly that. He took Jason up his arms, like, okay, all right, I'm going to go to Sparta and see what they say. This is crazy, right? This is very fascinating. So Xenophon, here's a nice long, lengthy quote about what happened. Xenophon tells the story. Quote,
"For you can be sure that the war will have to be fought against a really strong force, and against a man whose generalship is of the highest quality, one who, whether his methods are plain force or working in the dark, or of seizing an unexpected advantage, yet seldom fails to achieve his objects. He can use the nighttime as well as the daytime, and when he wants to move fast, he will put breakfast and dinner into one meal, so as not to interrupt his work. He will not think it right to rest until he has reached the point for which he set out, and done all that had to be done, and he has trained his men to behave in the same way, although he also knows how to gratify the feelings of his soldiers when they have won some success as the result of extra hard work. So all who follow him have learned this too, that one can have a good time also, if one works for it. Then, too, he is more self-controlled than any man I know with regard to all bodily pleasures. These never take up his time and prevent him from doing what has to be done."
So that's Polydamas talking to Sparta. This is making his case to them, saying, hey, look, this is what we're up against. What should we do? It's like, if you're going to send if you're going to help, it needs to be a lot of help. He's making the case that this is a serious enemy, and so this is the conundrum we're in. So what do you want to do? Sparta says, yeah, we can't fight that right now. We can't do it. So just do your best. So he goes back to Jason and says, hey, yeah, they're not going to send an army. So, you were right. But can I talk to Thessaly? Can I talk to Pharsalus? Let me convince them to surrender, because they put their trust in me and I need them to agree to it. I can't just turn this over to you. They'll see that as a betrayal. I need to do right by my people. And Jason again is like, yeah, I respect that. And he says, I said, look, just to make sure that you believe me, I'll give you my children as hostages. And Jason's like, nah, we don't have to do that. Go ahead. And it worked. The Pharsalus was convinced. They're like, yeah, we don't want to fight that guy. And, it's better to be on his side than against him. He seems like a decent fellow despite his aggression. We could do a lot worse, at least he's virtuous. At least he's someone to look up to in terms of how he behaves with his person. So that happened. And now with Thessaly pretty much fully in hand, he reinstalled a tax system that had been in place from a ruler many generations before. So it was something that was kind of familiar. And that allowed him to start collecting more revenue, which really set him up well, not only to continue to make sure he had enough money to pay his mercenaries, but to go beyond that. Let me return to the issue of Isocrates, the philosopher, because he's a really interesting guy. And the fact that he was sort of very pro-Jason here. This is a guy that was, rather than what a lot of philosophers discuss, which is like the meaning of life and why are we here and how the cosmos work. Isocrates couldn't be bothered with that. He wanted practical application. He wanted philosophy for him was a way to solve regular human problems. Ethics, rather than metaphysics. You know, application of things, like things that you can do, not just like imagine or picture. You know, how to help people day to day. That he cared about that more. He's still studied by people interested in rhetoric. You know, so he's still an academic tradition around Isocrates, one of many people from this age that continue to have a big influence 2,500 years later. Now, Plato was his rival. In fact, Plato founded the academy somewhat as a response to Isocrates' school of thought. So these two were kind of, you know, they were opposed in some ways of thinking. Isocrates did favor democracy, but he also favored Greek peoples conquering non-Greek peoples. Remember, this time, anyone who wasn't Greek was barbarian. That's just, barbarian doesn't have the current connotation. Barbarian just meant non-Greek speaker back then. And to them, that did have a connotation of looking down on them, but it's not the same as the way we use the word barbarian now. So he wanted Greek unity. He's like, I'm 60 years old. I'm a student of history. We just fight each other all the damn time. Let's not do that. And to do that, we need a powerful leader to unite us. So he wanted that. He wanted to be Greek. He didn't want some non-Greek leader. He wasn't about Persia. He didn't want Persia to come over and dominate. That's not good. Is this a good thing? Is it a good thing to combine to conquer, to cause all this death in order to save people in the future? It's a difficult moral question. Aegon the Conqueror has a strong argument for yes. In Westeros, there was way less war after the conquest than there was before. Way less people dying in war or from the side effects of war. Way fewer people starving. The population of Westeros peaked under Jaehaerys. I mean, and this was a direct result of Aegon causing so much peace. The King's Peace of Westeros was huge for prosperity and peace, and for the average commoner's life went way up in expectation. So that's kind of what Isocrates is getting at. He's like, look, the only way we're going to stop all this internecine struggle is if a strong leader unites us. And you have this guy corresponding with Jason of Pherae, the guy who seems most capable of doing that in this era. Jason, in fact, once said that he had to do some few unjust things in order to do many just ones. Isn't that the argument Aegon the Conqueror would effectively be making? I had to do some unjust things to do some just ones. Like, I made Westeros a much more peaceful place. To get it there, I had to kill some people. You know, some people who maybe didn't deserve it. A few who did. Now, the other side of this argument is, you know, Maegor. People like Maegor. So, yeah, Aegon comes along, but then you have Maegor. You have Jaehaerys and Alysanne on the good side, but you have Maegor on the other side, who's just killing septons and people who follow the religion that he doesn't like. So yeah, that's the downside, the very downside. And of course, you have people like Artaxerxes, who are like Aegon the Unworthy. This is a dynasty that has become corrupt and is just overly steeped in luxury, and yeah. Now, Greece also in this era, we said this before, there's like a balance that Persia wanted to maintain. Persia still wants to be able to hire Greek mercenaries because the hoplite Greek phalanxes were still the best infantry of the day anywhere. So Persia wanted to hire those to help fight against anyone who was rebelling, or just to, you know, make themselves stronger, to enforce their empire. So he can't have too much war in Greece, else there's no soldiers to hire. But if there's too little, then they're going to be an enemy to Persia. Then they could unite and become a problem in that sense. So at this era, a lot of the mercenaries were being hired by Artaxerxes or through Pharnabazus, trying to get that Egyptian campaign going. Again, very sluggishly. So note how Jason built this power. He hired mercenaries and then used them to make himself a ruler, and then he's able to rule the whole state and call up citizens. I think I said that already, but it goes to show this is a new model. Like, he did something no one else had done before, and a lot of other leaders, prospective, ambitious people are going, that's a really good way to do it, man. That's a new model that really works. I respect that. That's clever. I could do that maybe. So, and on top of all this, Greece is just becoming a wealthier place. The population is growing. The average person's lifespan is going up. The knowledge base is going up. Medicine is improving. Art is improving. Culture is improving. Food is improving. Lots of things it's just becoming a better place to live. And that simultaneously works against it in some ways, because the more prosperous, the more powerful it is, the more someone else wants to rule it, the more someone else wants to take it over. So yeah, nearby countries, we spent a lot of time on Jason, but there's some other countries nearby that we'll spend a few minutes on here before we wrap up today. Molossos, that's a place that's now modern day Albania. It's now called Epirus, or was later called Epirus. Molossos was one of 3 major tribes in the region of Epirus. They're the ones that became the dominant one. And so Epirus eventually was just ruled by the Molossians. But for a while they were separate in this time. It's only 5 years after this that it become one. So I'm just setting that up now. Now, the ruling dynasty in Molossos was the Aeacidae. These are the descendants of Neoptolemus, grandson of Achilles. And this is the only dynasty of Molossos or Epirus that is explicitly purely Greek or recognized as Greek. The others are recognized as, Proto-Greek or nearby, Greek neighbors. And that's important for their ability to get deeper into some of these other cultural things. At this time in Molossos, the birth of Princess Polyxena happened. Now, Polyxena, when she was a little older, she changed her name to Myrtal, which is pretty similar to that god of death in Baldur's Gate, or in D&D, Forgotten Realms of Raging, after joining a mystery cult. So she joined a religious cult, changed her name to Myrtal. But then, many years later, when her husband's chariots did really well in the Olympics, she called herself Olympias. Now, many of you will immediately recognize that name. She was once played by, what's that actress that was married to... Angelina Jolie played Olympias in a movie. I'm kind of being coy with whose mother she is. Some of you already know, but for those of you who don't know, I'll leave it as a surprise. But this is a very important person. She claimed descent also, besides from Achilles, she claimed descent from Trojan Prince Helenus, who was the one of the sons of Priam and Hecuba and the twin brother of Cassandra. So Helenus is the less famous twin of the two there. Cassandra is the one that everybody remembers, but he was a seer also. In some traditions, Helenus was taught by Cassandra. In other traditions, they just were both kind of born with the ability. So yeah, Molossos, this area is by 370, so only 5 more years from now, it's going to be a state rather than warring tribes. Thrace, modern day Thrace, is Bulgaria, parts of Greece and Turkey. Back when Persia under Xerxes invaded Greece, when they lost, when their power slipped after their failure there, the Odrysian dynasty emerged in their wake and dominated the region of Thrace. Now, Thrace, so it became a kingdom maybe around that time, maybe around 480. So a little bit earlier than some of these other places, but it's still very tribal and warlike and not unified. But around this era, you have a king named Cotys I, who had really pushed it to another level, and it did start to resemble more of a state with organization and unity. And one of his daughters is going to marry Iphicrates the Innovator, which is a real unusual thing. Iphicrates is an Athenian. Marrying a Thracian is very odd because Athens and Thrace have gone to war many times. So this is going to be a little bit of an issue down the line for Iphicrates, and he's going to be kind of have his feet in two camps that are not always happy with each other. Thrace is also going to play the Game of Thrones by marriage alliances. That's one of the most standard elements here. And the Odrysian dynasty, not just Cotys, but some of the others, we're going to see marriages with Macedonia and some other neighbors, and that's going to create some important power blocks. Speaking of Macedonia, we talked last time about Amyntas III. He had lent some of his territory to the Chalcidian League. They refused to give it back. He got Sparta to help. Sparta helped him. Sparta and Amyntas have things in common because they're both monarchies. So they have that, they have some idealism in common. He was the first Macedonian king in at least 6 decades to have a reign free from internal strife. Of course, he faced strife elsewhere from his neighbors, the Illyrians to the west mainly. So this Macedonia was already a state with kings, but this was the first time in a long time that they had like stability. So some of the states nearby here are forming themselves into monarchies. Some of them are just sort of getting through the early stages of violent stages of early monarchy and becoming more organized and more dangerous to their neighbors, more capable. At one point, the Illyrians, who are the most tribal of these states, installed a pretender on the Macedonian throne. That's how powerful they got, that they installed a pretender on the Macedonian throne. Thessaly, helped by Jason of Pherae's father, Lycophron, probably, expelled the Illyrians, and Jason was able to maintain that friendship with the Macedonians and kept that relationship going. As part of this deal with Illyria, this guy, Amyntas III, he married Eurydice. Eurydice is going to have 3 children. Her story is pretty interesting too, but her children, Alexander, Perdiccas, and Philip, are all going to be important. Philip's birth we took note of last episode. Now, he also tried to get Iphicrates to marry one of his daughters, but he married Cotys, the first daughter, instead. He still wanted that relationship, so he adopted Iphicrates. That's right, Amyntas III adopted Iphicrates. So Iphicrates is just like everybody wants Iphicrates. He's married to a daughter of the Thracians. The Macedonians wanted him and adopted him. He's sent to Egypt to fight for Persia against the Egyptians. And he's a hero in Athens for beating Sparta a little bit, doing damage to Sparta, helping them win, and then innovating the army and changing their footwear and their shields and their everything. Like, this guy is just, what a reputation. Now, in this year, the year 375, Amyntas III sent Ptolemy of Eloros to be his envoy to Athens. This Ptolemy of Eloros was making some plans behind the scenes unbeknownst to Amyntas. He may have been having an affair with Eurydice, Amyntas' wife. Now, Macedonian kings often had multiple wives, which, makes it a little easier for them to have affairs because, they're all just distracted by other people. This affair may not have happened till after Amyntas' death, we'll see. But either way, they're making moves. They're doing some intrigue behind the scenes there. As we've said, the Macedonian throne, mostly very unstable. Most Macedonian, I think we even used it as an example in the Pretenders and Imposters episode of a monarchy where just everyone is murdered. There's just the amount of times you could find a Macedonian king in this era or 100 years before that didn't die of murder is like 1 or 2, and some of those were just, they died of illness within 2 years. Like, no one had time to murder them yet. Hey, if he hadn't died of illness, he probably would have been murdered. The sickness got him first. So Illyria, let's talk about Illyria. It's the second to last of these. No, it's the last of these, my bad. Now, Illyria has a reputation for piracy, raiding, and even into Roman times, the Illyrian pirates were a thing. There was a queen of Illyria with a queen of pirates. It's just a lot of really neat stories that come out over the course of several centuries. In this era, they're coalescing a bit. They're not like a full kingdom yet, not the way these other nearby kingdoms would recognize, but they have their first royal dynasty ever. And this guy is called Bardilis. He was born in 448 BC. He was a coal miner. That's something else fascinating about this era, or some of these earlier eras, or any era that's where a country is new. Because once you have a dynasty, it's just people that are from that dynasty. But when a dynasty is new, it can come from anywhere. It can be someone that claims to descend from Achilles or Zeus or something like that, but can also just be a coal miner. And that is just something you just don't see any other time. Like, you don't have a coal miner in the middle of a dynasty. You might have it at the end or the beginning, like when someone else takes over. But during, no. So he was just a badass, just ambitious, strong, capable, low birth, but goes to show that doesn't matter. Not always, anyway. He developed the first Illyrian royal dynasty. He was the first to develop Illyria both militarily and economically, to reinvest rather than just this tribal infrastructure. He started to, make them more of a state, like I said. And he had a dream to conquer eastward, which was shared by a lot of Illyrians. Again, this is Croatia, so to the west, there's water, and Italy, which at this area is not nearly as wealthy as Greece and Persia and all that. Rome is not much of a thing yet. They exist. Obviously, we've been giving some news updates on them from here and there, but they're not that powerful yet. Eventually, Bardyllis did invade Macedonia. Remember, I said that Amyntas III had to pay a tribute back then, and had that pretender on the throne for a while. Well, this is the guy that did that. That was resolved eventually 3 years ahead of where we're talking, 372. A deal was finally made. The Illyrians were pushed back, but he got them. They were such a threat that Amyntas had to pay them a tribute. So Amyntas, king of Macedonia, is sending money to Bardyllis, first king of Illyria, to not attack. And by this time, by 372, Bardyllis is going to be 76 years old. So big deal. 13 years prior, in 385, Bardyllis had allied with that Dionysius of Syracuse, who sent him armor and weapons. Now, this is armor and weapons because this is more of a tribal state. They don't have the infrastructure to build as many, they don't have as many smiths and forges and all that. So a bunch of suits of armor is a real big deal. And he did this, what he did with that was he massacred 15,000 Molossians and began raiding Epirus. He even tried to take the temple at Delphi, tried to capture the oracle at Delphi. That got a lot more of Greece interested. Even Agesilaus came forward with that. Agesilaus with Thessaly and Macedonia all teamed up to stop Bardyllis from taking Delphi. But they didn't stop him overall. They just stopped that particular plan. Now, Bardyllis also going to play the Game of Thrones with marriage alliances. He's going to have people, his daughters are going to marry into Macedonia and other places. One of them is the famous warrior princess Kanane, but she's not born for another 18 years. We will definitely talk about her when the time comes, so teaser there. Warrior princess Kanane. She is a real badass. So as you can see, as I set out to explain, as I hope I've accomplished, several northern states are coalescing into kingdoms that are capable of acting as one. They're unified, or at least partly unified, certainly more than they had been in the past. And they are dealing with each other as well as Greece proper and with Persia. And it's creating this bigger world, this bigger sort of region where our story is taking place. You've got more characters entering the picture, more powers, more personas, and more goals. And with that, the wars get a little trickier. The intrigue gets trickier. You've got more considerations. Every country has its enemies and its allies, and these can be entangling, right? Some people, like this guy, might be a friend of this guy, but that guy is a friend of his enemy. And people switch sides all the time as considerations change. Athens was fired up to attack Sparta after the incident with Sphodrias and attacking their port, or trying to. But only 2 years later, they were like, I don't want to fight Sparta anymore. We have our own goals, and we don't care about that. We'd rather have Sparta. Now things are even between Sparta and Thebes, and we're happy with that. So yeah, it's not ideology, it's self-interest. And sometimes ideology is a good cover story for self-interest, but yeah. So just like Persia wanted to dominate Greece proper, whether through military force, money, or both, that's what these northern kingdoms are going to do or are doing. And they're a lot closer. They're right there. They don't have to march thousands of miles and then cross the Black Sea, cross the Bosporus, cross the Dardanelles, the Hellespont, to bring an army in that nobody wants. It's a lot bigger threat to Greece when the armies are themselves somewhat or entirely Greek. Like, you don't have the built-in prejudice that helps push back against foreign rule when the rulers that intend to conquer are close enough culturally that doesn't really matter. You know, you can't say, everybody's fired up to stop the Persians. They're not that fired up to stop the Thessalians. They're kind of Greek too. You know, it's not as... People don't get as fired up about that. They hate Persia. Thessaly's just, to them, that's just like, those are just the country bumpkins. They don't want to be conquered by that, but it's much more preferable than Persia. So will these powers unite and turn their eyes southward? Will they attack Greece? Or will they just be too busy with each other? The way Greece is kind of busy with itself. Will these northern states ally with the southern states and create more entanglements? And, well, what's going to happen with Jason? What's going to happen with Bardilis, Cotys, Amyntas, Pelopidas, Epaminondas, Agesilaus, Artaxerxes? All these guys are still alive. Well, you'll have to continue listening to find out the answer to those questions. We have plenty more story coming ahead. Plenty more news on the Olympics. Plenty more news on other cultural things. We got news about scholars, doctors, mathematicians, astronomers, all sorts of fun things besides war and intrigue, but plenty of that too, because that stuff is good as well. Next time, showdown between Sparta and Thebes. Well, Athens is happy to take advantage of those two occupied with each other, trying to rebuild his maritime empire. Artaxerxes finally goes too far. As if he hadn't already. No, actually, there are some consequences for him going too far. And his army is finally ready to invade Egypt. So those are 3 things to look forward to next time. But also, more about Phocion, Cleombrotus, Datames, Cabrius, Iphicrates, Tiribazus, Darius, Ochus, you name it. Lots more characters, lots more intrigue, lots more Game of Thrones in ancient Greece. Thanks y'all for hanging out today. Appreciate the interest. I know this topic isn't the most widespread popular, but those of you who like it tend to like it a lot. So I'm definitely excited to be able to bring it to you and to continue it. We'll of course be continuing with our Westeros content as per normal as we lead up here to a big TV season filled 2026. So it's exciting. Next year will be great for everyone. Here is our trivia answer. The question was, who is said to be responsible for creating the sacred band of Thebes? Gorgodas, who I compared to Blackfish. Cavalry leader, very clever, maybe a leader of younger men at a time when there's a youth movement, but him not so much. And poll results. My question was, are you familiar with this era of Greek history? 41% of you said, no, it's all Greek to me. Almost half. 39% said somewhat, and 20% said yes, very. I'm glad 20% of you actually know. That's pretty cool. I'm glad. I mean, it is a really interesting era, as I've said, so I'm obviously not the only one to notice that. Not by a long shot. But I just had no idea how much you already knew some of this. So those of you who know it really well, let me know how I'm doing. Did I miss anything? Did I get anything wrong? Or just other takes. I'm interested. This is a fun thing to discuss. Whether it's a correction or just something to add on or anything, just let me know. Let us know. Maybe I'll give you a shout out in a future episode. And those of you who are learning, well, I would love to hear what parts are most interesting to you, which characters stand out the most. And again, as I said at the beginning, parallels to A Song of Ice and Fire that you have noticed that I haven't expressed. Hit me with those too. I'm sure there's some that I haven't noticed. Definitely out there. Maybe some that I have named that you think there's a better parallel for. I said Jason's like Daemon Blackfire. I said Artaxerxes is like Aegon the Unworthy, but who else are they like? There might be some other comparisons that are just as good or maybe even better. Some other related episodes besides the first two episodes in this series are the Rage of Heroes. That's the sort of a play on words with the Age of Heroes. We definitely have some Greek myth in that one. We have Parallel Lives episodes, obviously inspired by Plutarch, generally those are comparing Westerosi to other Westerosi, but sometimes they're to other figures. We have our A Song of Ice and Fire in Rome episode, which is a deep dive like this, but into Rome's comparisons to A Song of Ice and Fire. The Black Dinner, the Scottish inspiration for the Red Wedding. We have an episode on that. And we have the Wars of the Roses episode and the follow-up Pretenders and Imposters, which is a dive into fake kings, especially in the era after the Wars of the Roses, and fake kings in A Song of Ice and Fire. Thanks to Joey Townsend for our music. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld for our video intro and for the maps that you see behind us. On behalf of Ashea, I'm Aziz. We'll see you next time for more, and you know what to do until then. Valar, reread us. Or hey, just Valar, read us some Greek stuff. Either one. See you next time, folks.